Chapter 81, Fruit and Domineering. 2 days later, Lafitte finally returned to the Ghost Shadow, the single-arrow recording pointer's magnetic reservoir fully recharged. This little device was one of the 3 arrow recorders, precisely the prize Nethan had hoped for. Their daring raid had paid off, and with this extra pointer, their navigational options would grow exponentially. In the captain's cabin, Nethan spread the sea chart on the desk and tapped Port Alpha with a fingertip. "Our first stop is Port Alpha," he announced. "From there we'll follow the main shipping lanes. It's nearly impossible to shadow a pirate in the open Western Sea, but along the established route, every island forces a resupply stop to recharge the pointer's magnetic core. Those pauses give us just the window we need. With the Ghost Shadow's speed, we'll be able to close in on any target." "Understood, Captain." Lafitte slipped the older single-arrow pointer into his coat and mounted the new 3-arrow recorder. He gave the helm a sharp command. Course laid in, full sails. For 7 days, the Ghost Shadow sliced through rolling swells under a canopy of stars. When they arrived at the first island, the crew swung into action. In just 2 days, they'd fully transferred and calibrated the magnetic charge. By dawn of the 3rd day, the anchor was up again. 5 days later, as dawn mist lifted off the waves, a second island appeared on the horizon, another crucial pit stop on their pursuit. Nethan stood at the prow, eyes fixed on distant shores, already planning the next move. With each recharge, each charted waypoint, the Ghost Shadow drew closer to its quarry, and to the prize that awaited. The Ghost Shadow's legendary speed, combined with Lafitte's uncanny navigational skills, carried them across 3 islands in just 20 days, and delivered them safely to Port Alpha. As soon as he stepped off the ship, Nethan made a beeline for the Ghost Shadow's training chamber. Inside, the air thrummed with the sound of his fists striking a solid steel block. Boom, boom, boom. Each blow left fresh dents in the dark metal, as though Nethan wore a pair of razor-sharp gloves. He'd spent his last battle against Dalmesia studying every nuance of his opponent's armed color, never once unleashing his own hardened form. In their world, nothing unlocked hidden potential faster than real combat. And after that clash, it had taken Nethan only days to master the art of armed color hardening himself. Now, with each rhythmic punch, he felt his strength build. His eyes snapped open with resolve. Drawing in a slow breath, he summoned the power of distortion into his fist, then unleashed it in a final, thunderous strike. Boom! The steel block shuddered, and then cracked along a spiraling line that snaked from the center of the face to its very edge. Nethan stepped back, satisfied. His training had only just begun. Nethan stared at the steel block before him. If Rhodes withdrew his power too abruptly, the entire bar might crack beneath the strain. He pressed his fist against the cold metal, only to realize that the armament hockey he had summoned a moment ago had already faded. He frowned. Despite mastering basic hardening, he still couldn't perfectly merge his hockey with his devil fruit power. After refining the flow of his armament hockey, Nethan's next goal was clear: learn to infuse it into every facet of his fruit ability. They weren't irreconcilable forces. Given precise control, any devil fruit technique could be coated in armament. Doflamingo weaves his threads with it. Luffy layers his rubber limbs in it. Even Whitebeard's quake shockwaves become far deadlier when hardened. He recalled how Akainu nearly crumbled from a single hockey-infused tremor strike, proof that only a properly hardened blow can bypass the natural filtering of elemental forces. Powers that manipulate elements, quakes, lightning, magma, follow different rules than purely physical transformations like rubber or thread. Nethan knew he had to adapt his own fruit's abilities accordingly. Taking a deep breath, he summoned his hockey once more and prepared for another attempt at true fusion. For Nethan, the thread and rubber devil fruit powers integrate almost flawlessly with Busoshoku Haki, erupting into attacks of terrifying force. His twisted and shock fruits, by contrast, manifest as entirely non-physical abilities, so Haki can only serve as an auxiliary boost, merging into the power rather than binding with it. In other words, thread and rubber are inherently synergistic with armed color, while twist and shock merely receive Haki as an added bonus. That bonus, however, is nothing to scoff at. Layering Busoshoku Haki onto an ability delivers a shockwave no living thing, human or otherwise, can withstand. If he could somehow fuse Haki's coloring and hardness into the very fabric of his distortion powers, the result would be cataclysmic. Yet, precisely because twist and shock have no tangible form, imposing Haki upon them is exponentially harder than it is on thread or rubber. For more than 10 days straight, Nethan has thrown himself into relentless practice. He's pushed his body until every muscle trembles, attempting to awaken the twist fruit's power and shroud it in Busoshoku Haki. Still, he hasn't managed so much as a flicker of Haki-imbued distortion. Each failure only steels his resolve to crack the secret, because once he masters this fusion, nothing in the Grand Line will stand in his way. Nethan's fist trembled with the raw energy of his devil fruit ability, and the armament Haki coating its surface wavered and collapsed under the strain of his power. He remembered what he'd seen Whitebeard do, infuse his quake-based power with Haki. If Whitebeard could lend his devil fruit vibrations that extra, domineering force, then perhaps the same was possible for Nethan's twisted energy ability. He stared at his hand, brows knitting in concentration. Whitebeard had already shown that Haki could reinforce an intangible power, a fact Nethan could not ignore. The path was clear. The only obstacle was his own inexperience. His armament Haki wasn't yet strong enough, and his mastery over both Haki and devil fruit energy still needed refinement. Someday, he hoped, his control and the power of his twisted energy fruit might even rival Whitebeard's. But for now, he was still far from standing atop the world as Whitebeard did. Nethan was about to resume his training when a gentle knock sounded at the cabin door. "Captain Nethan," came Robin's calm voice from the other side, "we've arrived at Port Alpha." "Understood," he replied, rising. He secured his training implements, then followed Robin up onto the deck of the Ghost Shadow. The morning sun glinted off the harbor's water as the ship slipped into its berth. Once ashore, Robin and Nethan parted ways. Each would slip into the bustling streets of Port Alpha to ferret out every scrap of intelligence they could find on the Iron Wall pirates. In a quiet alcove of Port Alpha's crowded docks, a plainclothes operative of the world government pressed a concealed transceiver to his ear, his expression grave. "Report, the Ghost Hand pirates have arrived in Port Alpha. We're keeping them under constant surveillance," he whispered. On the other end, Intelligence Chief Shen Sheng absorbed the news and replied crisply, "Maintain observation. No rash moves." He then escalated the report to the highest levels of the world government, and an identical dispatch was sent straight to Navy headquarters. The debacle known as the Rhodes Incident still haunted every strategic conference. The Marines and top government officials had been under intense scrutiny ever since, and now the Ghost Hand pirates were back in the spotlight. Dealing with Captain Rhodes's crew, Shen Sheng knew, would require more than a standard detachment. At least one, and ideally two, lieutenant generals, each commanding a squadron of warships, would have to be dispatched. The critical question loomed. Would the Admiralty commit the force necessary to contain this growing threat? "I think we should handle this quietly, through CP9, one official suggested. "Port Alpha?" another replied, tapping his finger on the map. "If I remember correctly, that route skirts 2 more islands, Crocodile's territory." "Exactly," the first said. "If Crocodile is ready to move, we can hold off on sending in our own forces. It's far more efficient to let the newly appointed warlord deal with the Ghost Hand pirates than to commit a heavy Navy squadron to surround and crush them." The second official nodded. If Crocodile eliminates the Ghost Hand pirates, the balance among the Shichibukai remains secure. But if he fails, we'll end up with an even bigger gap in our Grand Line strategy. Chapter 82. Arcadia, Alcalia. In a sumptuous suite on the top floor, Crocodile reclined on a leather settee, a half-smoked cigar clenched between his teeth. He studied the small listening device he'd just retrieved from the antique telephone and let out a low chuckle. The Ghost Hand pirates really think I'm some underling at their beck and call. I've no patience for their problems. Truth be told, he couldn't have cared less about the Ghost Hand crew, or their self-appointed role as pirate hunters. He'd already sailed into the New World, returned in defeat after tangling with Whitebeard, and still boasted a 200 million berry bounty. No upstart gang was worth his time. Tucking the bug into his pocket, Crocodile was roused from his thoughts by a polite knock. A burly man with a scarred jaw stepped inside, bowed low, and spoke in a hushed tone. "Mr. Crocodile, the Iron Wall pirates arrived in Port Alpha 10 days ago. They appear to be gearing up to strike us." Crocodile arched an eyebrow, his sharp gaze fixed on the newcomer. "Is that so?" he drawled, the curl of his lips promising trouble. "I've been tracking them for over a month," Crocodile murmured, his usually cold gaze crackling with unexpected interest. "To think they'd walk right into my hands." Compared to the Ghost Hand pirates, the Iron Wall pirates held far more value for him. The crew possessed exactly what he sought. His last strike against them had aimed to seize that very asset, but the target had slipped away. Now, with renewed determination, he issued his orders with clipped precision. "Keep a close watch on the Iron Wall pirates. I want updates the moment they resurface." Port Alpha's bustling docks teemed with rumors, but for Nethan, Robin, and Lafitte, intel gathering was second nature. Working independently, yet in perfect synchronicity, the trio amassed every scrap of useful information in less than a day. What they learned sent a shiver down Nethan's spine. The Iron Wall pirates, currently carrying a bounty of 180 million berries, had slipped out of Port Alpha 10 days prior. Their exact course remained a mystery until Robin delivered the critical breakthrough. "They've already crossed paths with Crocodile," she reported, voice low. "On one of the King's 7 seas, they clashed fiercely. The Iron Wall pirates took a crushing blow, though the captain and most of the command staff escaped with their lives." Nethan closed his eyes, letting the news sink in. Everything was moving according to Crocodile's game, and now he knew precisely where the next moves would fall. Nethan sat forward as Robin finished her report. Word had reached the Port Alpha underworld that the Iron Wall pirates were asking about a man named Crocodile. It was obvious they intended to pick a fight. Despite his newly claimed title, King of the 7 Seas, Crocodile's bounty stood at a surprisingly modest 81 million berries. But as Nethan well knew, no number could measure the true threat of a seasoned devil fruit user. Even if his sand powers had their limits, a single wave of his hand could bury entire fleets beneath shifting dunes. Granted, at this point in time, Crocodile was far younger and less infamous than the warlord everyone would come to fear. Baroque Works hadn't even been founded yet, and he'd never marched on Alabasta. His highest-profile victory to date had earned him just 170 million berries, which made sense. Any pirate with a multi-million berry bounty would want revenge after a crushing defeat. Still, Nethan's mind raced ahead 10 years, imagining the full force of Crocodile's sand mastery when it reached its peak. The Iron Wall pirates, bold enough to hunt him now, would never survive that reckoning. They were skating on thin ice, and Crocodile would be the avalanche to bury them. Nethan would not let his prey slip through his fingers, not even to the elusive Kiwuhai. His dark eyes flickered with resolve. True, coming to Crocodile's aid might earn him favor, but he couldn't ignore the ironclad lure of that 100 million berry bounty. Defeating the Iron Wall pirates promised not only the reward, but also a free talent point, and the activation of his twisted gravity branch ability. After a moment's calculation, Nethan spoke in a cool, measured tone. "The Iron Wall pirates are causing trouble for Crocodile. Robin, since you've been tracking him, you must know exactly where he's holed up." Robin, ever composed and reliable, Rhodes's unquestioned right hand, nodded crisply. "Crocodile has been in Alcalia for the past month." As she finished briefing Rhodes, Robin's eyes glinted with a new thought. She added, "Keep in mind that the Shichibukai are government-sanctioned pirates. If we move against Crocodile in his own territory, the world government will seize that as an excuse to come after us." Nethan leaned back, his gaze cool and steady. "There's always a chance he'll show up, but Crocodile isn't one to kowtow to the world government. He won't be marching alongside the Navy. Even if he does come looking for trouble, it doesn't scare me. 10 years from now, or today, I'm not intimidated by him, and this Crocodile is only about to become a Shichibukai. If he dares make a move against us, we'll crush him and collect that 81 million berries in bounty to boot. It's not much, but maybe the government will sweeten the deal with a bonus." He exchanged a knowing look with Robin, then sat up as footsteps echoed outside. In stepped Lafitte, his rosewood cane, crowned by an umbrella handle, tucked under one arm. With a smooth bow, he announced, "Captain, I've gathered the intelligence you requested. The Iron Wall pirates are already en route to Alcaria. By now, they should be very close." Nethan turned to him. "That matches Robin's and my analysis, but you've managed to nail the timing down even more precisely. Excellent work." Lafitte allowed a modest smile. With a deft motion, he produced a small device, a golden, compass-like instrument. They purchased an eternal pose for Alcaria on the black market. With this, they can navigate straight there without any known trace, perfect for a stealth approach. Nethan took the eternal pose, weighing it in his hand. "So they've planned this well. All the more reason for us to move first. Robin, Lafitte, prepare the Black Bounty. We sail tonight." Robin's eyes gleamed. "Aye, Captain." Lafitte snapped his cane shut and nodded. At once. As they dispersed to ready the ship, Nethan allowed himself a thin smile. Crocodile might be powerful, but on this board, they had the first move and the sharpest blade. "One for me, too." "Nicely done." Nethan nodded at Lafitte, eyes fixed on the permanent compass the navigator held. With that device in hand, they no longer needed to hop from island to island. They could chart a straight course to Alcaria, no waiting dockside in Port Alpha for magnetic stores to refill. Having mapped the Iron Wall pirates' route in detail, Nethan and Lafitte hurried back aboard the Ghost Shadow. Every sail was unfurled, and the ship sprang to life, surging ahead at its unrivaled speed. Whereas a typical cargo vessel might need 15 days to reach Alcaria, the Ghost Shadow cut the journey down to 6.5. At last, the sprawling island emerged on the horizon. Nethan made his way to the prow, drawing in a lungful of salt-laden air. He couldn't allow Crocodile to snatch the Iron Wall pirates' leader before him. If Crocodile succeeded, Nethan would have no choice but to confront that ruthless warlord head-on. Still some distance away, Alcaria's shore called to them. Nethan lifted his right hand and with a swift, practiced motion, tore open a rift along the sea's surface, an eerie doorway into the void below. Nethan's devil fruit power rippled through the Ghost Shadow's hull, drawing energy from the sea itself. He twisted that force into a towering swell that surged directly toward Alcaria's shore. By channeling his Logia ability into the water, he could propel the ship at impossible speed without harming its timbers, a trick he only used in dire emergencies, since it drained him completely. In an instant, the Ghost Shadow cleaved the waves, its bow carving a foaming white line across the ocean. What would normally have been a 10-minute crossing took barely 2. As the shoreline loomed, Nethan released his hold on the water. Lafitte and Robin scrambled to lower the sails and bring the ship to a halt. The Ghost Shadow coasted in and thumped softly against the sandy beach. Nethan leapt from the deck onto the shore. His boots sank into the wet sand, but his gaze remained steady, unflinching. He took a deep breath, eyes narrowing as he scanned the island ahead. "I hope I'm not too late," he murmured, "but if anyone's stolen my prize, they'd better pray for mercy, especially you, Crocodile." With that, he strode forward, every step measured and resolute, ready to reclaim what was his. Chapter 83, Distortion versus Barrier, Part 1. Afalia Island lay at the heart of the Kingdom of Alfaria, one of the 170 nations allied under the world government. Down on a crowded street, 2 dark figures stood on a rooftop, their eyes fixed on a ragtag assembly of men at the far end, no doubt the Iron Wall pirates that Nethan had been hunting. A few hours earlier, Rhodes had left Nico Robin to guard their ship, then slipped ashore with Lafitte to track this feared pirate crew and to chase any trace of Crocodile. Rumor had led them here, into Alfaria's capital, where they discovered not only the pirates' lieutenants, but the heart of their force. Before them stood T.B. Lavaro, the towering captain with a 180 million belly bounty, and Hanu, the hulking wrestler wanted for 70 million belly. Each man exuded the confidence of seasoned fighters, and their brutal reputations were whispered in every port. Lafitte turned to Rhodes, a faint grin playing at his lips. "Captain, shall we strike?" Rhodes returned the look, eyes gleaming. "Certainly." With that, he drew his sword. The afternoon sun glinted off the polished steel. "Let's give them a taste of our own brand of justice." Nethan balanced on the edge of the rooftop, hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the Iron Wall pirates assembled on the street below. They looked like a pack of ruthless predators, seasoned, savage, and dangerous. Then, with a soft rush of air, he leapt from the roof, landed lightly on the cobblestones, and strode directly toward them. The pirates were already moving in his direction. At the first sight of their black banners and ironclad silhouettes, nearby townsfolk recoiled in fear, pressing themselves against walls and storefronts. Whispers spread through the crowd. "That's the Iron Wall Pirates! The ones who burnt down 13 towns? I heard their total bounty is over 300 million berries. Their captain's a supernova with a 180 million berry bounty. No wonder they're feared all along the Grand Line." As Nethan approached, the murmurs turned into audible gasps. Dozens of pairs of eyes followed his every step, some filled with awe, most with dread. Yet Nethan ignored the panic around him. His calm, unwavering stride carried him straight into the heart of the Iron Wall Pirates' advance, as if he were unafraid of the notorious crew that had terrorized entire islands. Nethan froze in disbelief. Across the street, leaning casually against a lamppost, stood a man whose bearing he recognized at once, Ghost Hand Rhodes. Few locals had actually read the government bulletins detailing Rhodes's exploits, but everyone knew his name. Now here he was, a notorious pirate with a 200 million Bailey bounty on his head, strolling down the boulevard as if he owned the place. The crowd scattered, hearts pounding, instinctively backing away. Nethan recalled a whisper that the Ghost Hand pirates never targeted ordinary townsfolk. Rumor or fact, it didn't matter. Seeing Rhodes at all was enough to send nerves and common sense out the window. Before he could gather his thoughts, movement on the opposite sidewalk caught his eye. Another pirate crew was approaching, the Iron Wall Pirates. Nethan's pulse hammered in his ears. Legends told of their atrocities, the slaughter of entire towns, 13 settlements wiped off the map. Their reputation for bloodshed made Rhodes himself look almost genteel by comparison. What stunned him most was that the two pirate forces had converged here, on the same narrow street. A coincidence? Impossible. Ghost Hand Rhodes had built his fearsome renown on hunting down rival pirates. Why would he share territory, let alone a public street, with the Iron Wall Pirates, unless trouble was brewing on a grander scale? Nethan struggled to make sense of it. Two of the world's deadliest crews, face to face, and the rest of them caught in the middle. A tense quiet fell over the narrow street that ran from the port of Rhodes to the Iron Wall Pirates' encampment. Under thousands of staring eyes, some shocked, some fearful, Aud vanished in an instant. Whispers spread like wildfire. Could the notorious Ghost Hand Pirates really be confronting the feared Iron Wall Pirates here? At the center of the clearing stood Nethan, alone and unflinching. From the front ranks of the Iron Wall Pirates came their captain, T.B. Lavaro, a hulking figure marked by a jagged scar across his left cheek. He narrowed his eyes at Nethan's approach. "After all that uproar," he drawled, "you stride in as if you own the place, bold or reckless." Nethan stopped about 15 paces away and met Lavaro's gaze without hesitation. His voice was calm, even polite. "I didn't come here by accident. I came for you, Lavaro. Your bounty is 180 million berries, and I've heard you're deadly strong." A ghost of a smile curled Lavaro's lip. He glanced back at his crew, then fixed Nethan with renewed interest. "So you're the one who wiped out my naval squadron. Impressive. But standing in my way? That's a mistake. I have an appointment to keep and no time to indulge a pretender. Shall we finish this?" Nethan lifted his foot with an almost casual grace and smiled coldly. "Let's play a game," he called out. "A game where only one of us walks away alive." Without warning, he drove his foot down into the ground. In an instant, the cobblestones before him buckled and rippled like storm-tossed waves, sending the Iron Wall Pirates stumbling and crushing them underfoot. Across the square, Lavaro's usual mask of control cracked into ice. He was notorious for his ruthless discipline and for exacting vengeance on anyone foolish enough to cross him. Tonight, he'd come seeking retribution for Crocodile's insult, and he wouldn't be deterred by a mere display of power. Protection, barrier. Lavaro pressed his index and middle fingers together. A curved, glass-like shield sprang up in the street, its edge slamming into the ground with a resonant crack. The shockwave from Nethan's strike raced along the pavement, battering the barrier. The translucent wall warped and bowed under the assault, deforming like soft clay. It was the first time Lavaro's defenses had shown weakness. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his eyes. But he didn't waver. He thrust his arm forward. "Iron wall impact," he roared. The concave, twisted barrier snapped back into place with a resounding crack, its surface stretching like taut rubber. At the same instant, a surge of repulsive energy blasted outward, slamming into Nethin's twisting force. Boom! The collision ripped the ground apart, fissures fanning out until a 10-meter-wide chasm yawned open. The street's surface shattered as though struck by a magnitude 10 earthquake. Buildings lining the road trembled under the shockwave, windows shattering and facades crumbling until both structures collapsed in clouds of dust and debris. Bystanders froze, their eyes wide with disbelief. "Is that human?" someone finally managed to choke out. With barely a movement, Nithin had annihilated a vast section of roadway and brought down 2 buildings at once. The sheer force of it struck everyone mute, awe and terror warring on their faces. "He can't be stopped, can he?" Nithin studied the barrier before him, once deformed by his power, now perfectly restored. His calm gaze betrayed no surprise. So even a devil fruit ability can be countered. For example, the surgeon fruit can almost shatter the barrier fruit, rendering the barrier completely useless. Yet against a Zoan user, one whose punch could flatten an entire village, even that incredible strength wouldn't leave a scratch on it. And while Nethin's distortion fruit couldn't destroy the barrier outright, it managed to twist and warp it like rubber, something I never thought possible. "You're the first person who's ever rattled my barrier," Lavallo admitted, his voice cool but edged with menace. "But this ends now." A feral gleam lit his eyes as he raised his hands and swept them through the air. "Iron wall, attack!" With hardly a sound, 2 solid sheets of iron formed between his outstretched palms and skull, hot forward like twin guillotines. In an instant, they slammed together around Nethin, squeezing him mercilessly, as if to turn him into nothing more than a pulp. Nethin planted his feet and slammed his hands against the 2 onrushing barriers, bracing himself as they collided. With a deep hum, the glass-like walls, which should have been nearly impenetrable, twisted and warped under his force, as though molded from soft clay, each panel buckling inward in a great concave curve. In the world of devil fruits, there's no strict hierarchy between powers, only the question of whose fruit has been honed further. A barrier fruit user can hold firm against a weaker hostile fruit, but if the adversary's mastery eclipses theirs, they can simply tear right through. Nethin, the twister fruit wielder, had pushed his ability far beyond its ordinary limits. Lavallo's defensive fruit was strong, but it was no match for Nethin's raw, finely tuned control. Once the glass walls gave way under Nethin's assault, he didn't hesitate. He surged forward, his body a blur of movement, and appeared right before Lavallo in an instant. Startled, Lavallo threw himself backward without a second thought. He might be ruthless and stubborn, vicious even, but he wasn't about to stand and fight at a hopeless disadvantage. As Nethin advanced, cracks spread across the shattered barriers behind him, and the battlefield fell silent for the barest heartbeat before Nethin plunged into the fray. Nethin had just shown he could shape his own barrier like pliable clay, and Lavallo saw exactly where this was headed. With a snarl, the pirate boss stumbled back, gathering his strength. "The iron wall hammer!" he bellowed, thrusting both arms skyward. Before anyone could blink, the shimmering, liquid-like field around him coalesced into a vast, glassy warhammer. It hovered for a heartbeat, then, with a thunderous crack, came crashing down on Nethin. Unfazed, Nethin lifted a single fist and punched straight into the hammer's head. Boom! The collision detonated like cannon fire. A shockwave burst outward, flattening dust against the surrounding buildings. Even those who'd fled several streets away felt their eardrums ring. Back in the square, the Iron Wall pirates reeled, some staggering as the roar pulsed through their skulls. They could hardly believe their eyes. Their boss's legendary barrier, broken at a single blow, and now Nethin held the Iron Wall hammer himself. A murmur of astonishment swept through the pirate ranks. How was this even possible? Ever since they'd set their sights on Lavallo, nobody had ever managed to break through his barrier. Be they master swordsmen, the Springfruit tribe's champions, or even lieutenant generals of the Navy, everyone proved powerless against it. Not a single ripple, let alone a fracture, could be made in that barrier. Ghost hand roads, Hanu, vice captain of the Iron Wall Pirates, watched in disbelief as the serpentine, spectral arms flailed at the invisible shield. No wonder they called him Ghost Hand. Rhodes was strong, but could even he pierce Lavallo's defense? A flash of cold calculation passed through Hanu's eyes as he turned to his stunned subordinates. "Focus all fire on Ghost Hand Rhodes," he barked. "These are ruthless pirates. We don't need to face Lavallo directly. Take out Rhodes by any means necessary." At Hanu's command, the Iron Wall crew snapped out of their shock and rallied to their stations, blades drawn and guns raised. Just then, a deep, amused voice rang out from the rooftop of a nearby building. "Ho, ho, ho! Hold your horses," it called. "Do try to contain your excitement and let our captain finish his duel in peace." Silence fell for a heartbeat as every pirate, Iron Wall or otherwise, turned toward that unexpected interruption, curiosity and tension crackling in the air. Below the calm rooftop stranger, the clash between Nithin and Lavallo raged on, their next moves poised to change everything. Nithin glanced up to see Lafitte perched on a shop sign, one long leg dangling as he leaned casually on his polished mahogany cane. A crooked smile played across his lips as he regarded the Iron Wall pirates assembled below. With an 80 million Bailey bounty, Lafitte of the Ghost Hand Pirates was second only to Rhodes in infamy. His reputation as the Devil Sheriff preceded him. Hanu's eyes widened the moment he recognized that name. His face darkened. He shook his arms out, muscles bunching and releasing in a deadly rhythm. "Care for a little wrestling match?" he growled, voice low and tinged with menace. Around them, dozens of Iron Wall pirates braced themselves, anticipating the showdown between their two strongest fighters. Meanwhile, not far away, Nithin and Lavallo were already locked in combat. The duel seemed all but decided. Lavallo had been driven steadily backward by Nithin's relentless assault. In a blur of motion, Nithin vanished, then reappeared at Lavallo's side, right fist cocked and roaring toward his opponent's head. Lavallo reacted in an instant, invoking his barrier fruit power. A transparent dome flickered into existence, just inches from his face, only to buckle like soft dough under Nithin's strike. The barrier twisted and collapsed, snapping against Lavallo's cheek with a sharp crack. Lavallo staggered, dazed, as Nithin's fist cut through the air for another blow. And all eyes in the harbor turned toward the rising star of the Ghost Hand Pirates. Blood spurted from Lavallo's mouth as two of his teeth clattered to the ground. The right side of his face ballooned grotesquely from Nithin's punch. If it weren't for Lavallo's barrier absorbing the brunt of that blow, Nithin's fist would have broken his jaw entirely. Gasping through cracked lips, Lavallo snarled, "You'll pay for that, fiend." His eyes blazed with fury as he thrust both hands forward. In a split second, the empty air around him shimmered. Liquid filaments coalesced, hardening into countless crystalline blades that hovered like deadly satellites before streaking toward Nithin. Lavallo's barrier was legendary, so tough that it had shrugged off a king's punch capable of shattering a colossal golem. These glass-like swords, born of the barrier's power, were sharper than obsidian. Yet, as the blades flew, something twisted and dark stirred deep within Nithin. A cold aura flared around him, warping space itself. With a low, resonant hum, Nithin extended a hand, and every incoming sword shattered in midair, splintering into harmless, glittering shards at his feet. Lavallo staggered, blood still oozing from his lips and nose, his eyes widening in horror. The barrier he trusted had dissolved before Nithin's unleashed power. Nithin advanced, his footsteps echoing with quiet menace. Each movement crackled with otherworldly strength. Lavallo, battered and breathless, realized with dawning dread that this fight was far from over, and he was gravely outmatched. Nithin thrust out his massive hand, snatched the scattering swords in midair, and ground them together until they fused into a smooth, glassy orb. With a flick of his wrist, he sent it hurtling behind him, shattering the remaining blades into fragments. Before anyone could react, he lunged forward, closing the distance to Lavallo in an instant. Clenching his right fist, he smashed it into Lavallo's chest. Boom! Lavallo's hastily erected barrier wavered under the twisting force and collapsed like dough against his ribs. He was hurled backwards with a sickening crack, blood spurting from his mouth. Even though the barrier absorbed much of the impact, his ribs were nearly pulverized by the blow. Nethan allowed himself a cold smile as Lavallo lay crumpled and gasping on the ground. "I'll give you this," he said, voice low and steady. "You've certainly gotten a handle on your devil fruit powers, but you're still no match for me." He stepped closer, surveying his opponent's battered form. Judging by the techniques Lavallo had just unleashed, the man was far stronger than that green-haired pirate Nethan had fought a decade ago. Yet a bounty of 180 million berries still seemed a gross underestimate. Nethan drove Lavallo's back into a distant wall. The moment Lavallo struck the masonry, a translucent shield flared into existence between him and the building, abs orbiting nearly all of the impact. He crumpled to the ground, clutching his chest and coughing violently. You're the first person to ever hurt me." Lavallo lifted his head, his cold eyes drilling into Nethan's. "But if you want my head, you'll have to be bold enough to gamble for it." With a low exhalation, Lavallo flexed his knees and stepped forward. A viscous barrier seeped up around his feet, rippling outward in an instant. He pushed his power to its limit, and a 3-meter-high dome of glass-like energy sprang into being, encasing him completely. Nethan watched the shimmering fortress warily. He'd seen this before, a simplified version of Susano's barrier technique. No wonder Crocodile had never managed to shatter Lavallo's iron wall. Now he knew exactly what he was up against. Chapter 85, Big Loss, Part 3. Boom! Lavallo strides forward, each footfall shattering the floor beneath his glass-like barrier shell. Cracks radiate outward like the wake of a colossal metal war machine. Inside that barrier his voice declares, "Behold my absolute defense." Even muffled by the crystalline wall, the proclamation rings clearly in Nethan's ears. Then despair twists Lavallo's features into a cruel grin. He lunges, smashing a gargantuan, barrier-clad fist down toward Nethan's head, every atom of power ready to pulverize him. Nethan's brow furrows. He sidesteps at the last possible moment, letting the blow thunder onto the ground and send shards of concrete flying. "You're not going to dodge forever," Lavallo taunts, launching a relentless series of punches. Each strike reverberates through the hall, but Nethan weaves and ducks with fluid precision, the defiance flickering in his eyes. With a roar of exertion, Lavallo brings his palms together. The shimmering barrier melts and reforms into a razor-sharp longsword of pure, translucent energy. In one seamless motion, he swings it down, its edge gleaming like a falling star, aimed straight for Nethan's unguarded shoulder. Time seems to slow as Nethan braces himself for the next onslaught. The final clash of offense and defense is about to begin. Nethan sidestepped just in time as Lavallo's blade bit into the street, gouging a 10-meter scar through pavement and soil. Chunks of gravel sprayed in every direction. Nearby, the Iron Wall pirates fighting alongside Lafitte froze in awed silence. Lavallo had just unleashed his ultimate technique, Captain's Absolute Defense, a move no enemy tactic had ever pierced. Tales told of how he'd employed it once to rout an entire naval fleet led by a rear admiral without taking a single scratch. With a roar, Lavallo swung again, cleaving one side of a nearby house in half. He strode forward, grin spreading across his face. "What's the matter? Ready to beg for mercy?" His barrier-reinforced coat flared, sharpening his transparent longsword to a lethal point. He raised the blade, preparing to end the fight once and for all. But then Rhodes spoke, his voice even and cold. "You're the one who got it wrong. Lavallo." Lavallo froze. His twin swords hovered at shoulder height as he turned his glare on Nethan. The cruel smile didn't leave his lips, but his eyes narrowed. "Too bad you figured that out so late." Nethan watched coldly as Lavallo's command cut through the air. In an instant, Lavallo channeled every last ounce of strength into his blade, enveloping it in a black, crackling aura. With a roar, he brought the sword down in a devastating arc, one blow meant to finish the fight. Nethan's eyes flicked to the shimmering blockade that had sprung up around his opponent. He recognized that barrier's signatures, reinforced alloys and energy filaments layered into something like a translucent shell of glass. Enough to earn Lavallo a bounty of over 300 million Baileys, or so the chart said. Yet here it was valued at only a meager 180 million. A laughable downgrade. Calmly, Nethan let his eyelids drift shut. He curled his fingers into a tight fist and felt the familiar thrum of power surging through his veins. He remembered what he'd said moments before. He was ready for anything. ready to push himself beyond his limits. When he opened his eyes again, the descending sword was almost upon him. He threw up his arm and met the blade head-on. Metal screeched against metal as the shockwave rattled the ground. In a single fluid motion, Nethin spun his wrist. The enchanted sword warped on its own axis, twisting like a melted bar of steel. Seizing the corrupted weapon with a backhand grip, Nethin yanked hard. The barrier's framework groaned as he tore the entire construct from its moorings, Lavallo still clinging to the inside. Then, with a savage uppercut, he smashed the whole thing apart. Shards of energy and metal rippled outward like the wake of a stone dropped in water. Nethin didn't pause to watch them rain down. He swung his leg in a blistering arc and kicked the side of Lavallo's armored suit, sending his stunned adversary hurtling into the building beside them. When the dust settled, the barrier was nothing more than a shattered smear on the pavement, and Lavallo lay crumpled several meters away, brushing rubble off his shoulders. Nethin stood over him, chest heaving, the air still humming with his unleashed power. "This bounty," Nethin said quietly, "should have been 300 million. He flexed his fist, feeling the residue of that final punch. "Don't make me regret fighting you for 180. With that, he turned away, leaving Lavallo to pick himself up and reconsider just how dangerous Nethin really was. Nethin vanished from where he stood and reappeared in front of Lavallo in an instant. His fist thundered down, smashing into the still-mending armor. With a sharp crack like glass shattering, the barrier exploded from its core, and the full force of the blow tore through it, slamming into Lavallo's chest. A sickening crunch told of fractured ribs. Lavallo never had a chance to react. Horror and disbelief froze his features as the remaining barriers dissolved around him. He went limp and collapsed onto the rubble-strewn street. An eerie silence settled over the pirates. Hanu, the wrestler, showed no expression. The Iron Wall pirates looked on impassively. Even Lafitte paused in surprise before composing himself, offering a faint smile as he adjusted his top hat. Lavallo wasn't dead yet. He coughed violently, twice, trying to push himself upright. But each movement sent fresh agony racing through his chest, pinning him flat on the ground. Nethin approached without a flicker of emotion, stopping at Lavallo's side. He pressed his boot into Lavallo's chest and leaned down. "And to think your bounty was only 180 million berries," he said coldly. Lavallo could only cough in response, the words lost in pain. Lavallo convulsed, blood spewing from his nose and mouth in a grotesque torrent. He fixed his terrified gaze on Nethin's unreadable face, struggling to make sense of the words that tumbled from the young pirate's lips. What is he talking about? Is he mad? And yet, how could a madman wield such power? Nethin crouched beside him, voice low and steady. "With a display like that, your bounty should jump by at least 20 million. Fear blossomed in Lavallo's chest, spreading until he could barely breathe. He coughed violently, clutching at Nethin's sleeve. "No, please, don't kill me. If it's money you want, I have something far more valuable." He gasped for breath, eyes wild and pleading. Nethin's usually stoic features flickered with something like pity. "I have a map," Lavallo rasped. "A map of the ancient armaments. Take it, find one of those weapons, and you'll gain anything you desire." With trembling hands, he drew a tattered parchment from beneath his coat. Its edges were frayed, the brittle paper covered in faded ink. He stretched it toward Nethin, as though entrusting his very life to this crumbling relic. For the first time since the fight began, Nethin's expression shifted. He reached out, fingertips brushing the fragile blueprint. In that instant, neither pirate nor captive spoke, only the ragged wheeze of Lavallo's breath and the weight of ancient secrets sealed between them. Lavallo's voice trembled as he laid a yellowed parchment on the table. "This is it," he whispered, tracing the faded lines. "A map to Sea King Poseidon himself." He paused, swallowing hard. "You know the legends of the three ancient weapons that predate the world government. The King of the Sea, a mermaid princess who commands all the sea kings, the King of Pluto, a warship said to obliterate an island in a single blast, and the third, no one has yet uncovered its nature. This map pinpoints Poseidon's domain." Nethin reached out and snatched the brittle scroll from Lavallo's hand. He unrolled it slowly, his dark eyes narrowing as a strange light flickered in their depths. "So it's true," he murmured. Then, Almost without warning, the parchment tore itself apart. Invisible seams split the old paper into thousands of fragments, which fluttered to the floor like black snow. Lavallo cried out, stumbling forward to catch the falling pieces. "No, stop! That map was our only chance." He sank to his knees amid the shredded remains. "If word gets out, every pirate in the sea will hunt me down. Crocodile already suspects I have it. He'd kill me for even a scrap of this. And now, there's nothing left." He glared up at Nethin, tears in his eyes. "Are you mad? You idiot!" But Nethin said nothing. The remnants of centuries-old secrets lay scattered at his feet, and only he understood what power had driven him to destroy them. Nethin spoke with blank detachment. In an instant, a twisting force swept through the air, and Lavallo's body split apart as cleanly as if carved by a master surgeon's blade. No blood sprayed. His torso simply severed itself, two halves collapsing silently to the ground. A flicker of despair still haunted Lavallo's eyes as he stared up at Nethin, his final breath trembling on his lips. Leaning close so that only Nethin could hear, Rhodes murmured, "My vision pierces all disguise. The mermaid princess Bixing of Fishman Island is not merely royalty, she is the living vessel of the ancient superweapon known as the Sea King. And that so-called treasure map everyone's chasing? It's nothing more than a centuries-old doodle, scrawled by someone long dead. Yet countless adventurers have been led astray by its promise, dying in the hunt without ever discovering the truth beneath the tide." Chapter 86. Crocodile. Nethin stared at the notification hovering before him. Bounty, 180 million Baileys. Target, Iron Wall Lavaro. Status, complete. He'd just finished his latest hunt, and with it came his reward, 80 talent proficiency points and 1 unallocated talent point. The familiar chime of the system synthesis still echoed in his ears. He couldn't help a flicker of irritation. For someone of his strength, an 180 million Bailey bounty felt modest. Then again, bounties in this world weren't slapped on criminals at random. They were the product of lengthy deliberations between the government and the Navy, calibrated to the exact level of threat each target posed. A 150 million bounty could never carry the authority of an 180 million one, and once you climbed into the tens or hundreds of millions, every extra Bailey counted. Granted, a bounty didn't perfectly mirror raw power, but it remained the most reliable benchmark available. The sole exception was Chiwuhai, the Underkingdom. Its bounties had been locked in place the moment its founding treaty was signed. Nethin had once wondered whether marks from Chiwuhai earned special rewards, but the system's icy logic never offered him an answer. Today, however, something had shifted. For the first time, he detected the subtle warp of twisted gravity, a distortion in the world's very fabric that few could perceive. And he knew this hidden clue would illuminate the path ahead. A slow smile tugged at Nethin's lips. He'd long toyed with the idea of mastering gravity itself, but no matter how he pushed, the power slipped through his fingers. Perhaps there was no secret talent system. Perhaps a devil fruit, no matter how warped, could only deform matter, much like Whitebeard's quake fruit. Beyond that lay the absolute limits of their world. Even Whitebeard's titanic strength couldn't tear apart space itself. On the far side of the deck, Rhodes had just dispatched Lavallo. Seizing the moment, Lafitte rushed in while the massive wrestler Hanu was still reeling. With a single, precise thrust, Lafitte drove his blood-red wooden spear through Hanu's chest, piercing straight to the heart. Lafitte had always been stronger than Hanu, and despite facing a swarm of Iron Wall pirates, he moved with ruthless efficiency. As the other pirates hesitated, stunned by Rhodes's and Lafitte's sudden onslaught, Lafitte struck without mercy. Hanu crumpled, and the Iron Wall pirates fell into disarray. Nethin didn't bother counting their bodies or patting himself on the back. Instead, he turned, curiosity flickering in his eyes, and watched Lafitte as he withdrew his spear and stood over the fallen wrestler. Nethin landed with a thunderous impact, then swept his arm forward. The earth at his feet cracked and split apart, swallowing 7 or 8 pirates in a single, merciless instant. None of them survived. He wasn't in the habit of slaughtering soldiers who fought only because they'd been ordered to. Rhodes's reputation had never been that of a bloodthirsty butcher. But pirates were another matter entirely. Over the years, Nethin had raised more than a dozen pirate outposts, and today he added the Iron Wall pirates to that list. He felt no pangs of remorse. Beside him, Lafitte wore a grin as he flicked his blade through the air. In a heartbeat, he sent another Meitetsu pirate hurtling into oblivion. The Iron Wall's strongest captain and his deputy lay crumpled on the ground. Even those with bounties in the tens of millions were no match for Nethin and Lafitte. Laughing softly, Nethin drove his sword through the final pirate's heart. Lafitte watched the corpse slump to the earth. "Shall we hunt down the rest of the Iron Wall fleet and finish them off?" he asked, eyes still gleaming. Nethin sheathed his blade and shook his head. "We'll leave the cleanup to the Navy." Nethin shook his head. His mission here was complete, and the pirates before him were all dealt with. Tracking down the last remnants of the Iron Wall crew wasn't his concern. He drew his sword Chunla, wiped the blade clean of blood, then slid it back into its scabbard, already about to summon Lafitte. But a subtle shift in the air stopped him. At the far end of the street, dust swirled into a low cloud, hiding whatever moved within. When the haze cleared, a lone figure strode forward with measured steps. He wore a gray fur coat that brushed the cobblestones, a stubby cigar clenched in his teeth, and a deep scar ran diagonally across his cheek beneath one cold eye. This was Crocodile, one of the 7 warlords of the sea. He paused amid the bodies of the Iron Wall pirates, his gaze cool and detached as he surveyed the carnage. After a long, silent moment, his eyes locked onto Nethin. Chapter Kex, Ambush at Alcaria. The Iron Wall pirates had come hunting Crocodile, but they didn't swagger into the main port. Like the Ghost Hand crew before them, they slipped their ships into a hidden cove on Alcaria's northern shore and landed under cover of darkness. By the time Crocodile's lookouts raised the alarm, their captain was already embroiled in a fierce skirmish with the Iron Wall vanguard. Nethin raced to the scene as soon as he heard the fighting, but even he arrived too late. The clash between the Ghost Hand and Iron Wall pirates was over almost as quickly as it began. Crocodile stood among scattered bodies and broken blades, a half-smoked cigar perched in the corner of his mouth. Thin ribbons of smoke curled above his head, drifting into the night air. Not far off, Sand, Crocodile's devil fruit power, slithered around the fallen form of Iron Hand Lavaro, seeping into his coat and probing every pocket. Crocodile's eyes narrowed. "Stop," he ordered softly. Lavaro wouldn't have left the ancient weapon map behind. He knew its name well enough. It's called the Iron Wall, so he'd carry it on his person. Nethin folded his arms and met Crocodile's unblinking stare. "Lavaro's got nothing on him anymore," he said quietly. "The map, you took it." Crocodile's lips curved into a faint, cold smile. "So that's why you've been lurking around, making bold appearances in my affairs," he said. "You crave that kind of power, too." A flash of understanding crossed Nethin's eyes. No wonder Crocodile had struck at the Iron Wall pirates, and no wonder they'd come after him in turn. Neither faction wanted word of the map to get out, yet it was all based on a lie. True enough, rumors of Hades or the Heavenly Kings might be real, but the Sea King? Impossible. And Crocodile's own expedition to Alabasta a few years back, chasing the ancient weapon Hades, only proved how desperate he was to bury the truth. "So you mean this fake map?" Nethin asked, reaching up to tap the torn parchment hanging from his belt. "I've already ripped it to shreds." At that, Crocodile's eyes narrowed into slits, danger coiling in his gaze. He should have invented a stronger excuse. No one would swallow such nonsense now that the scraps lay in tatters. After a heartbeat, he leaned forward. "The world government sent word not long ago. They want your head. I paid no mind to it until you showed up on my doorstep and stole what was never yours to take." His voice turned cold and distant, as though he were addressing someone already dead. When it comes to ancient weapons, the more people who know of them, the greater the chance of disaster. Even if Nethin handed over the map now, it wouldn't alter his fate. He was destined to die here. Chapter 87, Distortion and Rustling. A low rustle filled the air. Beneath Crocodile's boots, the cracked earth gradually dissolved into fine grains of sand, shaped by his devil fruit power. Across the uneven ground, roads met the warlord's fierce glare with steely calm. He already understood Crocodile's intentions. There was no need to elaborate. This man might have dealt crushing blows to the Navy and laid waste to the Iron Wall pirates, but he was no expert on ancient weapons, and Rhodes certainly wasn't one of the Navy's simpletons. Crocodile advanced in slow, deliberate steps, each footfall stirring a cloud of dust. When Rhodes fell silent, a frigid light ignited in Crocodile's eyes. In the next instant, his right arm turned to writhing sand, striking out in a powerful arc toward Nethin. "Arc Moon Sand Dune," Crocodile growled. At his command, a crescent-shaped sand blade materialized, humming with lethal intent as it sliced through the air. Nethin's muscles tensed, and he braced himself for the oncoming strike. It didn't slice through flesh, it drained the life from anything it touched. When Crocodile unleashed that crescent-shaped sand blade, Nethin's response was instantaneous. He clenched his fist and drove it straight into the oncoming wave. Twist fist! Boom! His punch shattered the sand into a flurry of grains, the swirling blade exploding harmlessly away. The force collapsed in an instant. Nethin exhaled, fingertips tingling from the impact. "No one ever believes the truth," he murmured as dust drifted around them. "If you fire the shot, you have to risk your life. If you refuse reality, then the biggest fist decides what's real. Strength is the only test. Life itself is the wager, and it looks like you're ready to bet." Crocodile's lips curved into a faint smile. He'd expected nothing less. Anyone strong enough to rout the Navy and crush the Iron Wall pirates wouldn't be ordinary. With deliberate force, he slammed his right arm into the ground. Boom! Nethin's power flared to life the moment he willed it. Cracks spider-webbed through the ground beneath him, radiating outward from where he pressed. Moist black soil flashed brown and then yellow as it lost every last drop of water, grinding itself into fine, dry dust. In the span of a heartbeat, the earth for dozens of meters around him had turned to powder. Then those clouds of dust whipped around Crocodile, constricting like a living noose. "You want to reshape the battlefield to your advantage?" Nethin's voice was calm, his gaze steady as the street dissolved into a sandy wasteland. "Sand isn't your monopoly." Boom, he slammed a foot down. The incoming dunes collapsed into themselves under a twisting force of Terra energy. Then, with a single, precise gesture, Nethin raised his hand toward Crocodile. The fine dust leapt from the ground, coiled around its target, and tightened without warning. Boom! Crocodile's form exploded into a cascade of yellow sand, scattering across the arena before coalescing a few steps away into his familiar human shape. Manipulating sand itself, this was power on a whole new level. Crocodile's dark eyes fixed on Nethin, but there was no shock in them, only a mocking curl to his lips. "Competing with a Department of Nature elementalist?" he spat. "You really think you can challenge me?" With a single, contemptuous sweep of his arm, Crocodile lashed out. In an instant, the grains beneath Nethin's feet surged upward like a tidal wave, condensing into a razor-sharp sand blade slicing toward his midsection. Nethin moved before the blade hit, his confidence unshaken. He slashed a hand through the air, channeling his twisting energy into his palm. The crackle of raw power met the grinding hiss of sand. With a thunderous roar, the blade shattered under Nethin's force. No longer bound by Crocodile's command, the dispersed sand collapsed into drifting dust. Seizing the moment, Nethin blurred forward, one solid step, his figure a smudge on the ground. He clenched his right fist and drove it straight at Crocodile's chest. Humph! Nethin's punch landed with uncompromising force, sending shockwaves through the dust-choked battlefield. Crocodile hadn't counted on such raw tenacity, and now he was about to discover exactly what it meant to face Nethin's true power. Crocodile let out a low snort and launched himself at Nethin, swinging a gargantuan fist of sand, nearly twice the size of the young man, with bone-shaking force. Boom! The two blows met in midair. Nethin's own arm twisted like a steel rod under the impact, tearing through Crocodile's sandy projection and exposing the crusted flesh beneath. But Crocodile didn't relent. His fist reformed in an instant, crashing against Nethin's with renewed fury. A cold gleam crossed the pirate lord's eyes as he prepared to drain every drop of moisture from Nethin's body. Wasn't that how he'd turned so many victims into mummified husks? Yet before Crocodile's power could take hold, Nethin channeled a violent, spiraling torque up his arm. Boom! Under that brutal torsion, Crocodile's sand-hardened arm shattered into a million yellow grains, scattering like confetti in all directions. The explosion of force sent Crocodile himself hurtling backwards, his form disintegrating in midair. "Your devil fruit won't save you here," Nathan called out, confident. True to his power, Crocodile's body collapsed into loose sand and reassembled a heartbeat later on the far deck. Even the blasted arms snapped back into place, completely restored. From a shadowy vantage point, Lafitte watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. He'd seen enough to know this fight was far from over. The elemental power of the devil fruit, legendary for being the strongest natural ability of them all, reacted violently to Crocodile's command. With a thunderous crash, the sand that had momentarily condensed into his form scattered like ash in the wind. Crocodile's voice dropped to a growl as he slammed his palm onto the earth. Erosion. Reincarnation. In an instant, the ground beneath him exploded into a churning sea of yellow grit. Soil, stone, even entire buildings succumbed to the relentless onslaught of sand, collapsing and pulverizing into dust that spread in every direction. From a safe distance, Lafitte's eyes went wide. He leaped back several paces, vaulted onto a nearby rooftop, and crouched there, watching the devastation unfold far below. But Rhodes refused to stand by. The moment Crocodile unleashed his erosion, reincarnation, Rhodes took a single step, then another, defying gravity as he sprinted up the face of a moonlit wall. Gathering speed, he sprang into the air and hurtled straight toward Crocodile. Crocodile snorted, his expression cold as ice. He lifted both arms, drawing in the swirling debris to form a roaring sand hurricane around him. The vortex spun outward with terrifying force, ready to swallow Rhodes and anything else in its path. Chapter 88. Transformation. The ground shuddered as Crocodile unleashed a massive sandstorm. Twin cyclones of abrasive dust and granules swallowed the battlefield, and yet Nathan didn't budge. He planted his foot, drove it into the earth, and with a fierce roar, blasted through the swirling maelstrom. In a heartbeat, he closed the distance and drove his fist into Crocodile's chest. Crocodile's eyes flickered coldly. In that single blow, he grasped the truth. Nathan's strength was no ordinary devil fruit gift. His muscles rippled with raw power, and his awakened fruit ability had grown to a near-superhuman level. Few men could withstand such force. But Crocodile was no slouch either. As a master of elemental manipulation, he knew physical might paled in comparison to the power of transformation itself. Sand was his domain. He could shape it, harden it, tear it apart. Grit swirling around his forearm coalesced into a serrated blade. With a grim twist of his wrist, he sliced back. Nathan met the attack without hesitation. He bent at the waist, weaving beneath the sand blade by a hair's breadth. The razor edge bit into the rocky ground instead, spraying sparks and loose grit in every direction. Impressive, Crocodile rumbled, wiping sand from his lip. Most who cross me don't last a single storm. Nathan rose into a low fighting stance, eyes fixed and unflinching. I'm no ordinary devil fruit user, he answered, and I won't let you win. The wind died down, leaving a shattered circle of earth and sand between them. Both fighters breathed heavily, muscles tensed for the next assault. Somewhere in the still air lay the promise. Only one of them would emerge victorious from this clash of power and will. As Nathan's fist lunged toward Crocodile's sand blade, an invisible force suddenly surged around his knuckles, hardening into a gleaming coating in an instant. Armament Haki. Amazing. Though he hadn't tapped into his Conqueror's Haki, the reinforced Armament Haki, combined with his peak physical conditioning, was more than enough to obliterate Crocodile's blade of sand. Crocodile, a veteran of the New World who had even dared to challenge Whitebeard, had never witnessed such a display of Armament Haki. Stunned, he hesitated and couldn't evade. He scrambled to form a sand fist, dust and grit wrapping around his fingers as he braced himself, but it was already too late. Boom! Nathan's punch shattered Crocodile's hastily generated sand armor and crashed directly into his fist. Though the blow wasn't fueled by the full force of Conqueror's Haki, Crocodile still felt a scorching jolt of pain pulse through his knuckles, leaving his fingers numb. Damn! Armament Haki? Crocodile muttered in disbelief. Nathan's ruthless mastery of armament was far beyond anything he had ever anticipated. Nathan's face went suddenly rigid. The shock, the contempt, the smug underestimation he'd felt moments ago, all of it vanished, replaced by an expression of utter seriousness. He reminded himself that there was a vast gulf between merely understanding hockey and being able to wield it effectively against a devil fruit user. Without Conqueror's hockey, and without exploiting any weakness in Crocodile's sand power, no matter how great your raw strength, you're courting death in a straight-up fight. Armament hockey was the foundation. Even the faintest coating could seize the very substance of a devil fruit ability and hold it fast. Did Crocodile really think he could control the battle forever? He still didn't know the full extent of Nethin's power. In the next instant, Nethin's armament aura flared around his fist and then snapped away. He pivoted on a heel, dodging the razor-sharp sand blade Crocodile launched at him. At the same time, a spiraling surge of force burst from Nethin's body, twisting the air into a violent vortex. Boom! A thunderous shockwave ripped through the cloud of churning sand. Had Crocodile relied on nothing more than his usual defenses, that blast alone would have dealt grievous damage. Even now, buried in a roiling dust storm, T was clear. Nethin was only beginning to show what he could do. Crocodile plunged into the golden sands and vanished, only to reform himself dozens of meters away. A cool calm spread over his features, erasing the surprise from moments before. "You still can't wield hockey properly," he remarked, sizing up Nethin. He'd learned the hard way how dangerous Whitebeard's punch could be. After challenging him, Crocodile had been all but obliterated by that same shockwave. The impact Nethin had just delivered bore a striking resemblance, yet it lacked the imbuing power of armament hockey. That shortfall was more than enough to decide the outcome in a handful of moves. Nethin didn't deny it. He knew his hockey was still too weak to reinforce his devil fruit powers. And Crocodile was no ordinary foe, but an admiral-level user whose abilities could lay waste to entire islands. In the blink of an eye, Nethin's form blurred. He reappeared at Crocodile's side, tightened his fist, and unleashed a devastating punch. Air warped around the blow, and Crocodile's body exploded into a spray of yellow grains, scattered once more across the desert floor. Nethin didn't hesitate. He channeled his devil fruit power and armament hockey into his left fist until it gleamed jet black and rock-hard. Then, scooping up a handful of loose yellow sand, he yanked the off-balance Crocodile toward him. "Desert sword!" Crocodile bellowed, slashing his hooked hand across the earth. In an instant, the ground cleaved in two along a clean, gaping fissure some 50 meters long. Nethin nimbly sidestepped the strike and countered with a backhand punch. His hockey-reinforced fist blasted through the swirling quicksand, sending Crocodile hurtling into the air with a thunderous crash. Crocodile barely had time to recover before summoning razor-sharp sand blades, hurling them in a relentless storm that carved the once bustling streets into a desert of jagged canyons. Nethin planted his feet and met him head-on. With a twisting uppercut, he shattered each incoming blade midair, then slammed a second, hammer-like punch straight into Crocodile's chest. "This won't work on me," Crocodile sneered, slamming his palm down. A towering shield of compressed sand blossomed before him, swallowing Nethin's next strike. Unfazed, Nethin tapped into the hidden edge of his hockey, distortion. His arm shimmered, the air warping around it, as he spun and unleashed a backhand blow charged with reality-bending power. The sand shield trembled, and then shattered. Crocodile staggered, sand cascading from his form. Nethin pressed his advantage, breathing hard, eyes burning with determination. The two warriors readied themselves, the battlefield a fractured desert, echoing with the promise of the next, devastating clash. Nethin's fist drove through Crocodile's sand shield like a thunderbolt, shattering it into a cloud of grit. He didn't let up. Punch after punch pounded his opponent as their duel swelled into something cataclysmic. The sand field Crocodile controlled, once confined to 100 meters across, rippled outward under the force of their battle, to 200, 300, until the very streets around them vanished beneath an advancing desert. On the fringes of the town, shops and lampposts disappeared under choking dust. Villagers, coughing and rubbing stinging eyes, stared in stunned silence at the rolling dunes swallowing their homes. Then a deafening roar split the air as a wall of sand exploded skyward, towering dozens of meters above the ground, visible even from blocks away. A second blast turned the earth to tremors. Gale-force winds whipped grains of sand through the streets, sending panicked citizens scrambling for doorways and bracing against the nearest buildings. By the time Alcaria's royal guards arrived, the battlefield had become a roiling sea of sand. They formed a tense line at its edge, exchanging anxious looks. None dared step forward into that swirling maelstrom. Nethan, the commander-in-chief of the guard, was no doubt powerful, but compared to Crocodile, one of the 7 warlords of the sea, he was severely outmatched. Still, Nethan had charged forward, determined to stop the sandstorm at its source. Around them, dust and gritty yellow sand spread out for hundreds of meters, obscuring everything in sight. Suddenly, a thunderous roar split the air. At the storm's heart, a towering wave of sand, easily 10 meters high, surged up again. Nethan braced himself and lashed out with a single devastating punch. His fist smashed Crocodile's sand knife to pieces, scattering its fragments like shattered glass. Then he drove his knuckles straight into Crocodile's chest. Boom! The warlord's body collapsed into a fluid heap of sand, tumbling to the ground. But almost at once, the sand coalesced back into human form. Crocodile stood up slowly, his usual smirk gone, replaced by a flicker of surprise. That punch, it felt unfamiliar. Crocodile had always known that only an attack powered by overwhelming brute force could harm him. Conventional energy strikes passed right through his sand body. Yet now, as he pressed a hand to his chest, he felt a dull, persistent ache. Had Nethan really managed to wound him with pure technique alone? For the first time, the warlord's confidence wavered. Crocodile's expression darkened, but before he could react, Rhodes was already lunging back in, his fist crackling with an unfamiliar energy. This time, Crocodile didn't dodge. He'd spent their earlier skirmishes baiting Rhodes into revealing his reach, but Rhodes had seen through every feint. With a roar of domineering will, Rhodes transformed both forearms into colossal blades of swirling sand and launched a sweeping strike at Nethan. Boom! Under the weight of Rhodes's warped power, Crocodile's own sand blade disintegrated in an instant. There was no shield left when Rhodes's fist slammed into his chest. The impact threw him off balance, and for the first time, true alarm flickered across his face. If the first blow had felt like a trick of the mind, this one was unequivocally real. Pain blossomed in his ribs, sharp and undeniable. Crocodile staggered, wind knocked out of him, forced to acknowledge that Rhodes's strength was no illusion. Chapter 89, The First Kill of the 7 Martial Seas. Surprised? Nethan asked, his tone level as he met Crocodile's glare. Why? It's only natural to grow stronger the more you fight. Surely you don't think I'm squandering my energy. He shifted his stance, calm but ready. Combat is the ultimate forge. No amount of solo training can replace the lessons you learn on the battlefield. Up until now, Nethan had practiced domination force and the distortion technique separately, each devastating in its own right, but never fully in sync. Yet in this clash with Crocodile, something clicked. With his left hand he projected an overwhelming aura of control, while his right twisted the very air. For the first time, the two powers danced in unison, their boundary melting away. He had been tempted to unleash that perfect fusion and end the fight in an instant. But doing so would have violated his code, to win by his own sweat and skill, not by a hidden trump card. So although he'd internally rehearsed the combined move, he held back, reserving it for the moment it truly mattered. Crocodile's jaw tightened, his face darkening. So even you admit it, those abilities aren't fully compatible. Nethan let a faint smile play at the corner of his mouth. Compatibility is an illusion until you break through it. With that, he lunged. A wave of distorting pressure roared from his right arm as his left hand drove forward, a living tidal wave of sheer will. Crocodile barely had time to brace himself before the dual assault struck, a blow that warped the ground and rattled his bones. The warlord staggered. In that instant, the whispered rumors circling the 7 Martial Seas gained new weight. Nethan had not only cracked the secret of merging two powers, but wielded them against one of the deadliest fighters in history. Crocodile's eyes burned with reluctant respect and unmasked fear. Nethan straightened, breathing steadily. Their battle was far from over, but he had just crossed a line no one else had. From this moment on, every warrior across the 7 Martial Seas would know a new name, Nethan, the first to slay and to master the impossible fusion of domination and distortion. For the longest time, Crocodile's greatest strength was also his deepest flaw. He relied on defense so heavily that he could hold Nethan in a stalemate and still fight at his leisure. But now that very weakness was being turned against him. Nethan had begun to adapt, and the momentum of their duel was slipping from Crocodile's control. Sand soldiers, attack! Crocodile's face darkened as he tapped into his devil fruit power. A roaring vortex of dust and sand swept around him. The particles spiraled upward, coalescing into massive, sword-like blades that hovered in a deadly circle. At his command, they solidified into an army of towering sand soldiers, each one poised to strike. With a thunderous roar, the sand soldiers lunged from every direction, their intent clear. Overwhelm Nethan in one crushing blow and end the fight immediately. Boom, boom, boom. Yet Nethan didn't flinch. He didn't dodge or weave. Instead, he planted his feet and raised his fists, meeting each sand soldier head-on. With a single crushing punch, he shattered one into a cloud of grains. A second went the same way. A third. Wave after wave of sand soldiers disintegrated before his relentless strikes, their once imposing forms pulverized into dust. Not one of their attacks landed a blow. In that moment, it was unmistakably clear. The tide of battle had turned. Crocodile slammed both hands into the earth, shaping the subterranean sand into a lethal spear aimed straight at Nethan. Before the blade even pierced the surface, Nethan drove his boot into the ground and unleashed his rotational energy. The half-formed lance exploded into powder. Though Crocodile prided himself on absolute mastery of the sand fruit, Nethan proved just as adept at fracturing sand's cohesion. "Don't you get it yet?" Nethan taunted, stepping free of the churning grains. "From the very beginning, this battle was all about pushing my own power." In a heartbeat, he closed the distance. Boom! His fist thundered through Crocodile's sand shield, smashing into his arms and crushing his head. The warlord's body shattered into yellow dust and was hurled dozens of meters away. When he reformed, blood trickled from his nose and mouth, staining the dunes beneath him. Nethan's spinning fist had already done serious damage to Crocodile, enough to prove how reckless the Sandmaster had been to challenge him in the first place. Crocodile ground his teeth, murderous intent flashing in his eyes, but the truth was unavoidable. The momentum of this fight had shifted irrevocably. Press on, and he would almost certainly lose. He needed to retreat. Yet escape wasn't so simple. Crocodile reminded himself of his own warning. Once he made his move, it was a gamble with his life. Summoning every grain of grit in his command, he let out a low growl and formed a churning sandstorm in his palm. With a sharp motion, he flung the tempest toward Nethan, and in the same instant his body scattered into golden motes, carried off by the desert wind. Nethan barely had time to react. As Crocodile's fragmented form darted forward like a living arrow, it tore through the storm with brutal speed. Without hesitation, Nethan's right hand ignited in black-tinged energy. He reached into the heart of Crocodile's sand vortex and yanked with all his strength, determined to end the duel here and now. Nethan's dual hockey flared in ruthless dominance, seizing hold of Crocodile's sand form and wrenching it apart. With a single, violent tug, the swirling yellow dunes split open, revealing Crocodile's battered human body. Without hesitation, Nethan's fist, blackened and white-hot with armament and Conqueror's hockey, shot forward. Boom! For the first time, Crocodile didn't dissolve into dust. Only a fragment of his shoulder scattered away as he hurtled backward, blood spurting from his mouth. The infamous pirate's eyes blazed with fury. "Shallan!" he roared, clutching his chest. He had survived the deadliest currents of the New World and even stood toe-to-toe with Whitebeard himself. There was no way he was going down now. With a deafening bellow, Crocodile thrust his arms skyward. Instantly, every grain of sand within a 100-meter radius leaped into the air, coalescing into a spiraling tempest of raw, crushing force. The pillar of sand surged upward, then crashed back down in a cataclysmic wave, aimed directly at Nethan. Gasps erupted from Alcaria's townsfolk and guards, their eyes widening in shock as the ground itself seemed to tremble under the onslaught. The kingdom of Alcaria was no desert wasteland. Once, it had been a thriving realm. Yet now an astonishing sandstorm raged through its heart, its power enough to unnerve even the most seasoned travelers of the Great Road. And before anyone could fully grasp its fury, a deafening roar split the gale. Time itself seemed to pause. The whirlwind froze midair, then collapsed like a spent sail, its sands drifting lazily downward. High above the dunes, two figures emerged from the dissipating cloud. Nethin's fist shot forward, striking Crocodile squarely in the chest. The impact threw Crocodile backward. He spat a mouthful of blood that stained the yellow grains swirling around him. Spectators gasped. Crocodile's fearsome reputation was known to many, but Nethin's renown was scarcely less, and in that tense moment the crowd fell completely silent. "Now," Nethin murmured, his eyes cold, "I claim Chiwuhai's head." He stepped off the currents of displaced sand as though walking on solid ground. Instead of falling beside his adversary, he wound every ounce of strength into his legs, pivoted in midair, and delivered a crushing kick to Crocodile's back. The crack of bone echoed across the empty dunes. The sickening crack of bone rang out like a death knell. Crocodile's eyes widened in shock, but his limbs betrayed him. He went limp. With a shuddering gasp, he fell forward onto the golden sand, sending up a plume of dust. Darkness repped into his vision as consciousness slipped away. Even as he faded, he could not accept it. Crocodile, the most feared natural devil fruit wielder, was meeting his end at the hands of a greenhorn pirate like Nethin. Nearby, Rhodes stood frozen, staring at the motionless figure in the sand. For a long, suspended moment, he remained rooted to the spot. Then his knees buckled, and he collapsed to the deck. A hush fell over the onlookers. Then, from ships and shore alike, cheers and shouts exploded across the water. No one had expected the Ghost Hand pirates, already a scourge to both Navy and world government, to strike again so soon. In less than 2 weeks, they had not only shattered the Iron Wall pirates, but now had felled one of the Seven Seas' greatest, Crocodile himself. Word of this duel would spread like wildfire. This victory by Nethin would shake the entire world. Every soul in Alcaria, friend and foe alike, could feel it. The Ghost Hand pirates were an unstoppable force, their black sails blotting out hope on the horizon. On the sun-baked dunes of the northern coast, Nethin paid no mind to the townspeople's terrified cries. He strode forward, eyes locked on the colossal form slumped at his feet, the legendary Sand Crocodile, Lord Crocodile of the King's Devil Sea. With one decisive strike, Nethin had brought the beast to its knees. He landed beside the fallen warlord in a spray of golden sand and paused, chest heaving as adrenaline coursed through him. 2 heartbeats later, a tranquil smile broke across his face. "Quest complete," a clear voice announced inside his mind. "Target, the King's Beast, Sand Crocodile Crocodile. Rewards, 100 talent proficiency points and 1 free talent point." Nethin let the words sink in, then lifted his gaze to the growing fleet of Ghost Hand pirates on the shore. Today, they had toppled one of the realm's greatest champions. Tomorrow, who could stand against them? The age of the Ghost Hand pirates had truly begun. Chapter 90, Twisting Gravity. When Nethin's talent system pinged its reward notification, he scarcely dared believe what he saw. A hidden bonus for slaying Vice Admiral Chiwuhai, an honor normally reserved for that rank's first takedown. Adding it all up, his shares from wiping out the Iron Wall pirates and other bounties, he now stood at 180 points of talent proficiency and had earned 4 free talent points to spend as he pleased. The existence of this clandestine reward made one thing clear. The system's hunting bonuses weren't tied strictly to the government's posted bounties. While most posted rewards did reflect a pirate's threat level, they weren't the whole story. Nethin leaned back on the warm sand, absorbing the news. He'd never expected an extra windfall beyond the world government's standard listings. After all, TB Lavallo had carried a 180 million bounty of his own, yet offered no hidden bonus when he fell. Still, it was best to be grateful. Fortune favored the prepared. After dispatching Chiwuhai, the notorious Vice Admiral's seat lay vacant, and among the peers who'd witnessed the duel, speculation already swirled about who might claim it next. From not far away, Lafitte drifted over on the breeze, his long coat billowing. He knelt beside Crocodile's fallen form, its once imposing bulk, now just contours in golden sand, and cocked his head. A thoughtful glint lit his eye as he regarded Nethin with newfound appreciation. "With that sort of strength," he mused softly, "you'd make a formidable Chiwuhai yourself." Nethin's lips twitched in a half-smile. The world had just shifted under his feet, and gravity would never bend quite the same way again. Nethan surveyed the ruined fortress through narrowed eyes. Even if I meet their qualifications, he murmured, the world government's already decided they want us dead. Rhodes nodded in agreement. Without the underground press to suppress word of Crocodile's defeat, the entire Navy would see Nethan as both a potential Shichibukai and a grave threat. One moment they'd be offering a seat among the 7 warlords. The next, they'd dispatch a fleet to snuff him out. Titles won't save us, Rhodes said, tapping the pommel of his sword. Unless we hold something that makes the Marines and the Celestial Dragons tremble with fear, any warlord appointment would be as good as a death sentence. Nethan straightened, the lamplight glinting off his coat. Then we won't accept it, he replied. My real plan doesn't depend on their favor. First, we disappear. I already know exactly where to go. Lafitte tipped his hat, offering a rare, genuine smile. Barely a moment since Crocodile fell, and you've got an escape route in mind. Captain, you never cease to impress. Save the praise for later, Nethan said with a wry grin. He turned on his heel and strode toward the exit. Rhodes cast one final glance at Crocodile's corpse, shrugged, and followed. Lafitte fell in beside them, cloak billowing as they vanished into the night. Nethan had no illusions about the fallout from destroying the king's Kiwuhai. On top of the last fiasco, 3 threats loomed over him. First, the CP, an elite, government-run intelligence agency, could send assassins after him. Their operatives were anything but weak, and another surprise attack could cost lives. His only defense would be to keep the crew on constant high alert. Even if Nethan felt he could handle a CP ambush himself, Robin's new role made splitting up impossible. Without him by her side, she'd be in grave danger. Second, Navy headquarters could dispatch at least 2 lieutenant generals, or even more, to surround and crush him. These were seasoned commanders with entire fleets at their disposal, and the worst possibility, running headlong into a field admiral. No matter that Nethan boasted 180 talent proficiency and 4 unspent talent points, the gulf between his abilities and an admiral's was simply too vast. A direct confrontation would be suicide, and there'd be no escape. Faced with any one of these scenarios, Nethan knew the path ahead would be treacherous. There was no room for mistakes, only razor-sharp vigilance and absolute unity among his crew could give them even the slimmest chance of survival. Thanks to this latest haul, Nethan's power will surely outstrip Doberman's. Yet if 2 or even 3 lieutenant generals were to combine their strengths, the result wouldn't be a simple 1+1. Even a Lafitte and Robin alliance wouldn't suffice against a single lieutenant general. Nethan has relied on the talent system to bring him this far, defeating every foe in his path, but he never fancied himself the Straw Hat Luffy of this world, ever capable of slipping out of any dire strait. He knows all too well that even unleashing a raging torrent of water or wielding unbreakable, death-dealing bloodlocks won't guarantee victory forever. True strength only attracts ever greater challenges. So far, his journey has been remarkably smooth, but Nethan also knows that one truly perilous encounter could spell his doom. There will be no last-minute rescue, no miraculous deus ex machina. Everything he has achieved, every future victory, rests on his own shoulders. That's why, from the very beginning, before making any move, he has spared no effort to anticipate every possible outcome. The news came like a tidal wave. Crocodile, the sand crocodile, one of the 7 warlords under the King of the Seas, had fallen to the Ghost Hand pirates. Within hours, Navy headquarters and the world government were scrambling to verify the report. Before long, every port and outpost along the Grand Line was buzzing with the astonishing development. For a time, countless souls were electrified by the news. After all, a warlord of the sea is no ordinary threat. These are the titans whose names even the 4 emperors respect. A Navy lieutenant general may command awe on paper, but the very mention of a sea king under the warlords stirs fear across the New World. When word first spread of Nethan's exploits, the world expected him to be the next target of a massive Navy dragnet. Many top commanders and intelligence agents predicted that the Ghost Hand pirates would be hunted mercilessly. If they weren't wiped out entirely, they'd be forced into hiding for years. Yet here they were, barely 2 weeks later, flaunting an even greater triumph. Nethan had not only bested a supernova with a bounty north of 100 million, but had struck down a Sea King as well. From the outset of their journey through the Grand Line's first half, the Ghost Hand pirates' upward trajectory has seemed unstoppable. And all the while, the seas hold their breath, because if Nethin's next move follows the pattern so far, the world won't know what hit it. The government and the Navy had both issued urgent orders, and every fleet in the Grand Line was now focused on Alcaria. Ship horns and cannon salvos echoed across the restless sea, but atop a lonely cliff on the island's eastern shore, Nethin, the spark who'd ignited this storm, stood perfectly still, gazing out at the horizon. In his two brutal encounters with Crocodile and Tibi Lavallo, he'd escaped serious harm. A single shallow slash across his shoulder had been his only wound, and 3 days of makeshift bandaging had worked wonders, though he knew a proper ship's doctor might have sped his recovery even more. He peeled away the linen wrap, exposing a dark brown scab. With a quick swipe of his finger, he dislodged it, revealing fresh pink flesh beneath. A faint scar would remain, an affront to his pride, for Nethin prided himself on flawless form. He made a mental note to request a proper surgeon once this dust settled. Shaking off the irritation, he flexed his arm. It moved without a hint of pain. Then he closed his eyes and called up the interface of the talent system. Gravity twist, engage. In that instant, the world around him began to warp, obeying his silent command. Nethin drew in a deep breath, made his choice, and immediately invested his 3 free talent points into the second branch of the twisted fruit, distorting gravity. A brilliant golda end flash erupted as the emerald green icon shifted to radiant yellow, signifying the skill's activation. At the same moment, a comforting warmth coursed through Nethin's body. It didn't bolster his muscles or directly amplify the twisted fruit's power. Instead, it stirred something entirely new within him. Until now, his world had been defined by sky and sea, air and earth. But as the current spread, Nethin felt his perception expand. The familiar horizon seemed to dissolve, revealing hidden layers of reality pulsing just beyond ordinary sight. For the first time, he sensed the subtle distortions of gravity itself, as though he could peer into the invisible threads that bind all things. Chapter 91, Sustainability. A sudden whoosh swept through Nethin's senses, an odd, electric tingle that vanished as quickly as it came. But something fundamental had changed. He could now perceive gravity itself, and astonishingly, manipulate it with his distortion power. Closing his eyes, Nethin willed the gravitational pull on his body to invert. In an instant, the force that once held him to the deck shot him skyward. He clenched his teeth at the momentary queasiness, then uncorked his faith in the new ability. Rotating through a wild, head-over-heels 720-degree spiral, he felt like a leaf in a gale. With a sharp exhale, he released the distortion and drove off the air beneath his boots, executing a perfect moon step back toward the deck. His legs buckled slightly beneath him, and he steadied himself, head spinning. Below, on the deck of the Ghost Shadow, moored on the open sea, Robin stared up in stunned silence. Nethin landed, swaying as he fought to keep his balance. After a long moment, he met Robin's gaze, and almost in a whisper, asked, "Is this God's power?" Robin looked away, shoulders sagging. He wouldn't humiliate his captain by voicing the doubt burning in his mind. Instead, he simply remained silent, convinced Nethin had crossed into madness. Nethin finally admitted defeat in his search for an insect-repellent liquid. This world simply didn't have anything that would keep mosquitoes at bay. Instead of pressing Robin for more answers, he turned his attention back to his new ability, twisting gravity itself. After a few minutes of concentration, Nethin hovered above the deck of the Ghost Shadow. He drifted left to right, then right to left, testing his balance in midair. Below him, Robin sat cross-legged on the polished wood, engrossed in her book. Her face remained as blank as ever, but Nethin was certain she was judging him. If she dared, she'd yank him down with a flick of her own power, but whatever consequences that might bring, she preferred to stay silent. A little while later, Nethin realized he'd conquered the basics of flight. He settled into a slow, steady hover and began considering his next challenge, combining gravity twisting with the moon step. The moon step was a technique for walking on air, anchored by a constant downward pull. If he could abolish that pull, then take it in the direction he wanted, he could launch himself forward at incredible speed. He tested it immediately. Shifting the gravity vector so that down pointed backward, he activated the moon step. The result was thrilling. Nethan rocketed forward over the deck, the wind whipping past his ears. Below him, the ghost shadow blurred. Above him, the sky stretched clear and open. Robin looked up at last, marking her page with a sleek bookmark. Her expression didn't change, but the faintest arch lifted one eyebrow. Nethan grinned. He'd mastered flight, and now, with the moon step bound to his gravity bending, he might never touch the ground again. Fighting in the sky with nothing but the moon step against seasoned foes like Doflamingo or Kizaru is a recipe for disaster. But the moment you add gravity manipulation to your arsenal, the entire calculus changes. Whoosh! Whoosh! Air rippled around Nethan as he wove together two powers, each leap of the moonstep amplified by his mastery over gravity. Synchronizing these abilities into a seamless aerial dance was no small feat. He'd only recently awakened his gift for warping gravity, yet after countless hours of practice, his skill at walking on air had become nearly instinctive. The result was an upgraded moonstep. Even without dedicating extensive training to the technique itself, his instantaneous mid-air bursts rivaled those of a 6-star Navy specialist, or perhaps even a headquarters vice admiral. Despite the edge it gave him, the combination demanded a punishing toll on his body. Bending gravity was surprisingly light on energy, but the relentless exertion of the moonstep was another story. 30 minutes into the drill, his stamina hit its limit. With a final, exhausted exhale, Nethan released his gravity control and slowly drifted back down to the deck of the Ghost Shadow, chest heaving as he fought to regain his breath. Nethan watched as Robin settled on the deck bench, book in one hand, and absently lifted his glass of juice with the other, raising it to his lips without ever taking a sip. He just stared at the liquid, neither drinking nor setting the glass down. Nethan drew a steadying breath and shot his captain a mocking look. What was Robin playing at? The captain of the feared Ghost Hand Pirates, snatching his crew's refreshments like a common scoundrel? Shaking off the distraction, Nethan turned his attention back to the rocky shoreline. After a brief pause to catch his breath, he bounded up the cliffside once more. This time, he didn't rush into using his powers. Instead, he called up the glowing interface of the talent system hovering before him. Without hesitation, he funneled 90 talent proficiency points into physical enhancement. A warm, golden light pulsed around him as the system recalculated his stats. Agility enhancement, 150, advanced. Physical enhancement, 350, peak. With a maximum of 500 points in physical enhancement, he was now 2/3 of the way to total mastery. Nethan flexed his muscles, feeling solid progress under his skin, and ready for whatever challenge lay ahead. Nethan's physical enhancement talent isn't a fixed bonus, it scales by percentage. Hitting 100% means his body has reached its absolute limit. No further gains are possible, yet this also means his passive talents now radiate genuine dread. If Nethan trained conventionally, he might top out around the headquarters lieutenant general tier. Thanks to this full-tilt multiplier, however, he's edging into GARP-level territory. With his physique maxed out, he funneled the remaining 90 talent proficiency points straight into his Twisted Fruit power. The result was explosive. His distortion field doubled its reach from 100 meters to over 200. It still can't rival the island-rending force of Whitebeard or a Marine Admiral, but in these waters, few could ever hope to compete with that kind of power. Nethan stared at the newly unlocked combat talent skill tree, his eyes flickering over each entry. Gunshots, 50. Melee combat, 100. Twisted Fruit, 390. Navy 6 Shave, 0. Navy 6 Forms Paper Painting, 0. The Moon, Step of the 6th Form of the Navy, 0. Domineering and Domineering, 15. Armed Domineering, 0. If only I could reassign those gunshots points, he muttered under his breath. When he first arrived in this world, raw physical strength wasn't enough to compete with firearms. He'd learned early on that guns were indispensable, but now, with enemies relying less on ranged weapons, that investment felt largely wasted. In contrast, his melee skills remained as indispensable as ever. Losing one advantage only to gain another wasn't a bad trade, but still, he couldn't shake the urge to refine every ounce of his power. He shook his head, willing the interface to vanish. The glowing menu dissolved into nothingness, leaving him alone on the rocky outcrop. Nethan clenched his right fist, letting the familiar surge of energy flood his arm. He focused on the gravity around him, channeling his skill, Twisted Fruit. With a sudden, explosive kick, the ground beneath him shuddered. 100-meter radius of cliff face and jagged boulders buckled and cracked as the local gravity warped at his command. In an instant, the fractured stones lifted, hovering in midair like stalled meteors. Dust and debris swirled upward, suspended by the force of his technique. Nethan let the floating rubble hang for a heartbeat, then relaxed his concentration. With a shuddering gasp, the stones crashed back down, filling the valley below with thunderous impact. He opened his eyes, satisfaction and anticipation burning in his gaze. This was only the beginning. Although Rhodes had no direct contact with Nethan's body during the suspension process, the distorted gravity didn't vanish. It simply weakened over time, remaining under Rhodes's control. Just as Nethan had anticipated, the power no longer cut out instantly. It faded slowly. A flash of triumph lit Nethan's eyes, and a crooked smile curved his lips. Before, his gravity-twisting ability required a physical medium. The moment that medium broke, his power snapped off. It was like holding a knife. If the blade fractured, his force stopped at the break, unable to influence the detached piece unless he re-established contact. Now, after activating this enhanced distortion, even when the medium vanished, his twisting force continued to act on the broken fragment. In practical terms, if the blade shattered, it would still obey him. Its only drawback a gradual loss of power over time, and that lingering hold was more than enough for Rhodes' purposes. Nethan's eyes gleamed with uncontrollable excitement. He lifted his hands and brought them crashing together. Boom! In an instant, the rocks within 100 meters shattered into countless fragments, each piece frozen midair. Drawing on Nethan's power, the debris hurtled toward a single point, and with a roar that shook heaven and earth, they fused into a colossal meteor, tens of meters in diameter, suspended overhead like a flawless work of art. Chapter 92, Captain Nethan's power, had just grown even more formidable. Robin, who had been quietly reading on deck, couldn't stay seated any longer. She sprang to her feet and stared, breath-catching in her throat, at the cliff face in the distance. 100 meters of solid rock had fractured and lifted as if torn from the earth. Countless stones and boulders hovered in midair, coalescing into a single colossal meteor-like mass. The sheer force behind it was beyond belief, far exceeding anything the Twisted Fruit should be capable of. Below deck, one of the deckhands who'd heard the thunderous crack was already slumped against the rail, dazed and unable to move. On the deck of the Ghost Shadow, Robin's eyes widened as she tracked the floating mountain of rubble. Hairline fractures appeared across its surface and began to spider outward, growing by the second. If a rock that size came down nearby, even off to one side, the shockwave would generate a wall of water strong enough to capsize their ship. Crack! Crack! The fissures deepened into a jagged web, and a cold sweat beaded on Robin's forehead. The airborne boulder was moments away from exploding apart, and the Ghost Shadow was directly in its path. Nethan materialized on the meteorite's jagged surface just as it began to shatter. In an instant, his distortion aura flared outward, mending the cracks with a thunderous roar. The fractured rock sealed itself beneath the warping field, but only for about 20 seconds. That would have to be enough. He crouched, eyes narrowed in concentration. Once he severed his direct connection to the ship's comm array, his Twisting Fruit power could remain active remotely for exactly 20 seconds. Not as versatile as the Fluttering Fruit or the Gravity Fruit, but each time he used it, its potential grew. 20 seconds was more than enough to finish the job. With precision, Nethan relaxed his hold. The field collapsed, and the meteorite began a slow, controlled descent toward the sea below. It drifted down the cliff face, settling on the ocean floor. Even at that gentle pace, its sheer mass displaced the water, sending a rolling swell through the cove. The Ghost Shadow bobbed and pitched on the sudden waves. "Captain," crackled a voice over the comm, tense with relief, "could you please avoid pulling stunts like that so close to the ship?" Robin released a relieved breath, masking her worry behind a warm smile as she glanced across the deck at Nethan. A subtle tension still hung in the air. Nethan's eyes flicked toward her, his expression carefully neutral. "Call Lafitte back. We'll set sail tomorrow. Robin nodded and tapped the communicator at her waist. Within moments, she'd re-established contact with Lafitte, who was still on the island. Nethan added quietly, "Remember, the recording compass is only a third charged. If we depart tonight, we'll lose its signal entirely." A crackle of static, then Lafitte's calm voice came through. Having just climbed aboard, he sounded curious. "So we're leaving tomorrow morning?" Nethan leaned against the railing, meeting Lafitte's voice without hesitation. "Yes. Where we're headed, the magnetic field is off the charts. As soon as we get within range, it'll lock onto the compass needle all on its own. At that point, all 3 needles might point to the same island." Lafitte ran a hand through his hair, considering the explanation. As the ship's navigator, he knew better than anyone how these recording compasses behaved, and yet Nethan's plan was audacious. He hesitated only a moment before letting out a low chuckle. "Very well. I'll have the crew ready." With that, the decision was made. At dawn, they would set sail. Every trial Nethan had faced since signing on with Rhodes only confirmed the captain's brilliance. On the very day he met Rhodes, Nethan found himself along the rocky shore, practicing his newly acquired gravity distortion ability. Waves crashed at his feet as he bent gravity around his fists, testing the limits of his strength. By sunset, he'd grown startlingly accustomed to his surging power and learned to bend it with improving finesse. The following morning at high noon, the Ghost weighed anchor and hoisted her sails. Lafitte, standing at the helm, glanced toward Rhodes. "Captain, which way shall we steer?" Their compass was still recharging its magnetic charge, and since Rhodes alone had chosen this voyage's goal, Lafitte had no heading to follow. Rhodes stretched out a hand on the deck rail and answered with his customary calm, "Due east, just keep us out of Alcaria's sight." Lafitte and Robin exchanged uneasy looks. No plotted course, no mapped coordinates, only Rhodes's single command. Yet both trusted him implicitly. Lafitte gave the order, and the Ghost slid through the waves, slipping quietly beyond Alcaria's horizon. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and the last silhouette of Alcaria faded to a blur of shadow and sea. Captain Rhodes stood at the rail of the Ghost Shadow, gazing skyward. Next stop, Sky Island. At his words, Nethan lifted his right arm. His 5 fingers curled gently inward, and a ripple of distortion spread out in all directions, enveloping the Ghost Shadow's hull. In an instant, the ship's gravity inverted. A low creak ran through the timbers as the nearly 40-meter vessel drifted upward, parting the waves like a stone through water. "Whoa!" Voices echoed across the deck. Sailors staggered, clutching rails for balance. A handful of hired hands stared around in horror and astonishment. Even Lafitte looked on with wide eyes, slack-jawed. Only Dr. Robin Nicolette remained composed. Well, almost. As the ship rose higher, she tilted her head back, watching the darkening sky. An expert in O'Hara archaeology, she knew all about the so-called empty islands, mysterious, floating landmasses that drifted between cloud and sea. Sky Island, she thought, truly was the perfect refuge to slip out of the world's glare. But to lift an entire ship into the heavens, that was something else entirely. At last, Robin's surprise melted into a delighted smile. Around her, the crew's unease gave way to nervous excitement. Below them, waves foamed and roared, but above the sky yawned wide, inviting them to venture into the clouds. She never doubted Nethan's power to send the Ghost Shadow up to Sky Island. After all, he never attempted anything unless he was absolutely certain he could pull it off. Lafitte's eyes widened in surprise, and when Robin confirmed what she'd heard, a slow smile spread across his face. The legendary Sky Island? It really exists. At that moment, the ship hovered 30 or 40 meters above the sea. Nethan raised a single hand, and the entire vessel surged forward, accelerating sharply as it climbed into the clouds. Above them spread the buffer space Nethan had crafted long ago, a hidden realm that could only be accessed by warping gravity. With his unique ability, he could step into Sky Island whenever he chose. But Nethan's true objective lay beyond mere aerial mastery. He had come for the natural thunderfruit. It was now March in the 12th year of the Great Pirate Era, and although devil fruits were turning up across the world, the thunderfruit remained elusive. Some whispered it had never appeared. Others claimed it simply hadn't been found yet. Either way, its power as one of the mightiest nature fruits was unquestioned, and Nethan intended to claim it for himself. Nethan understood that mastering the Thunder Fruit alone wouldn't instantly earn him a Navy Admiral's commission. Still, with a little practice, its power would be more than sufficient to carve out a name for himself among the King's 7 seas. He'd known about this devil fruit ever since he discovered its location on that deserted island. Yet, he'd allowed Anilu to claim it first. Walking away from it felt like passing a treasure chest on the roadside without even opening it. He reminded himself that, even though he already wielded the distorted fruit, adding the Thunder Fruit to his arsenal would drastically boost his crew's combat capabilities. The world's Alent system technically permitted the mastery of 2 devil fruits, but the cost in unassigned talent points was prohibitively high. So if he wanted both powers at once, he'd have to outthink the system. And that challenge was precisely the sort of test Nethan lived for. Chapter 93, Sky Island. A few days later, Nethan coasted into the docks of the Kingdom of Alcaria, his breath ragged and his clothes dusted with road grit. He jumped off his bicycle and scanned the harbor, but the ships were already gone. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Too late, he thought miserably. I should have arrived sooner. The moment the news reached him, he dashed out of headquarters, certain that, given Alcaria's magnetic anomaly windows, he could intercept the Ghost Hand pirates before they set sail. But by the time he'd made the journey, the pirate fleet had vanished beyond the horizon. Suppressing his disappointment, Nethan kicked back onto his bicycle and turned away from the empty docks. With a subtle flick of his will, the wooden planks beneath each spinning wheel froze instantly, leaving a narrow ribbon of glittering ice in his wake as he pedaled off. Several days later, the naval squadron stationed closest to Alcaria returned triumphantly to port. They'd recovered the body of the infamous pirate Lord Crocodile and hurried it back to naval headquarters under tight escort. In the War States Command's war room, Marshal Warring States leaned over his desk, eyes weary as he studied the incoming report. His aides stood at attention. They slipped past us, the aide admitted. By the time we realized they were fleeing out of Alcaria, it was already too late, but we did secure Crocodile's corpse. The marshal rubbed his temples. Unacceptable, he muttered. He stood and swept back his coat. Get me Nethan on the line immediately. I want a full account of why he failed to intercept that fleet. The aide bowed and hurried out, leaving the marshal alone with the quiet hum of the headquarters, already plotting their next move toward the mysterious Sky Island. Admiral Warring watched Qingji's departure from naval headquarters with cool detachment. On paper, it seemed unthinkable, an admiral personally sending out a pirate with a 200 million belly reward, but Admiral Warring understood why. First, Nethan's influence had grown dangerously large. Second, Qingji's mission was entirely off the books. No one in the chain of command even knew he'd been sent. Just as Warring reached for the secure line to query Qingji's commanding officer, the desk's covert communicator blipped to life. He tapped the receiver. Yes? A low, authoritative voice crackled through. This is Fleet Admiral Sengoku. Admiral Warring, the matter of the Ghost Hand pirates has been elevated to the world government's direct oversight. We may deploy naval warships at any time. I expect your forces to cooperate fully. I understand, Warring replied after a moment's pause, then disconnected. He wasn't surprised that the world government had stepped in. Any threat larger than the Marines could handle was now theirs to resolve, and if they were more determined than the Navy to eliminate Nethan, so much the better. The Rhodes affair had been heating up for days, far from something to celebrate. That's why the CP agency decided to handle it in complete secrecy and send Qingji off on this mission alone. No press, no fanfare, just a silent operation. Hours later, the airship Ghost Shadow sliced through the sky, its engines humming steadily as it climbed past 6,000 meters. Below, the ocean had all but vanished, swallowed by a shifting blanket of mist and cloud. Peering ahead, Nethan spotted a vast white expanse looming in the distance, like another world suspended above the blue. As the Ghost Shadow approached the cloud barrier, its roar softened and the ship began to decelerate. Nethan sprang onto the masthead, bracing himself against the cold wind. Reaching out, he focused his distortion power into the mass of mist. The clouds trembled, and with a resonant crack, split open under his will. Seizing the moment, the ghost shadow surged forward, its path cleared by Nathan's feet, as it pressed on, climbing ever higher into that boundless sea of clouds. Nathan stared in wonder as strange fish and colossal monsters drifted just beneath the surface of the cloud sea. Some of the beasts had spotted the ghost shadow, but before any could close in, the skyship shot upward, ascending toward a brighter layer. With a thunderous rumble, the hull of the ghost shadow burst through the dense white blanket, punching into a sudden hole in the clouds. The ship hovered momentarily in midair, then gently settled onto the soft cloud water beneath. Remarkably, the cloud deck held the vessel's weight as steadily as any solid pier. "This is a floating island," Lafitte said, leaning over the railing to inspect the impossibly firm cloud surface below. A laugh bubbled from his lips. "Incredible. Clouds strong enough to bear a ship." Nathan nodded, his mind racing to reconcile what he saw. He'd read about sky islands before, but seeing one up close, watching an entire sea ship come to rest on nothing but vapor, was beyond belief. Still, in this world of magic and wonder, the extraordinary was ordinary. He swept his gaze around the silent expanse. "Lafitte, what about our tracker? Any updates?" Lafitte glanced at the sleek recording device strapped to his wrist. His eyes widened. "There's definitely movement. All 3 arrows are pointing the same direction." At the rare hint of excitement in Lafitte's voice, Nathan squared his shoulders. Whatever lay ahead on this empty island, they were on the right track. Nathan and Lafitte stood on the deck, eyes fixed on the advanced recording pointer in Nathan's hand. Unlike a simple compass, this device sported 3 slender arrows that normally fanned out toward the 3 nearby islands. When all 3 arrows converged, it meant a strong magnetic pull in that direction. Today, the arrows had shifted, but instead of pointing toward any of the known islands, they still tilted sharply upward. Nathan exchanged a look with Lafitte. "That can only mean one thing," Lafitte said quietly. "We're heading for the White Sea again, and this time our destination is the empty island up above." Nathan nodded. According to legends dating back 10 years to Luffy's era, the empty island lay hidden high in the sky. Its thin air made every breath a struggle, and even those with devil fruit powers risked disorientation, or worse. Kaido of the Beasts had once plunged there in free fall, barely surviving. For their own safety, they would have to adapt first. They anchored the ship's balloon system and spent the next several hours gradually ascending to 3,000 meters. Every 200 meters, they paused, letting their bodies adjust to the thinning air. Lafitte monitored their vital signs and kept an eye on the pointer, ensuring the arrows stayed locked on that upward angle. By the end of the day, Nathan felt his strength returning. The altitude no longer tugged at his lungs with the same ferocity, and his devil fruit energy flowed smoothly through his veins. Satisfied, he finally spoke. "All right, let's move." Activating his ability, Nathan summoned the ghost shadow cloak around him, its ethereal fabric rippling in the high-altitude wind. With a fierce shout, he rocketed upward, breaking through the 10,000-meter mark in an instant. Lafitte followed close behind, and their ship hovered at the edge of the atmosphere, sails frozen in the rarefied gale. Above them lay the empty island, silent, uncharted, and bristling with unknown dangers. But now, guided by the unwavering point of the recording pointer, Nathan and Lafitte were ready to press on. As they set sail across the boundless sky, the 3 arrows glowed steadily ahead, marking the way to whatever secrets the empty island held. Chapter X. Lightning on the Clouds. Ever since Nathan first set foot on the Grand Line, he'd possessed the power of the Thunder fruit. That simple fact struck him with renewed urgency. The devil fruit hadn't come from Angel Island at all, but from Pika Island, an isolated sky isle fated to collapse in just 4 years. Fleeting memories flickered through his mind as he studied the recording compass in his hand. Its bearing led them directly to Angel Island, exactly as described in the old voyage records. Yet Nathan had no intention of lingering here. His true destination lay beyond, on the distant island of Bika. To chart a safe course, he needed an authentic sky chart, and those, legend said, were hidden somewhere on Angel Island. They sailed into the soft embrace of the white cloud banks and dropped anchor just above the island's mist-shrouded shores. Angel Island was ruled by Governor Ganfor, and though the locals watched warily, Nethin's small crew drew only puzzled curiosity rather than outright hostility. After all, Blue Sea ships occasionally breached the knock-up stream by several secret routes. Nethin's eyes scanned the floating city of spruce trees and marble mosaics. His real prize, however, was not the governor's treasury, but the ancient historical text stone tablet, said to contain maps of the surrounding sky isles. Walking side by side across the drifting clouds, Nithin turned to Robin, the crew's resident scholar. "Robin, keep watch for any surprises from above," he said quietly. "I'm sending Lafitte to sneak into the archives and retrieve the sky chart. On my end, I'll draw out any resistance." Robin nodded, her dark eyes bright with determination. She slipped her notebook under one arm and fell in step beside him. Nithin straightened his coat against the cool breeze, every sense on alert. Moments from now, their carefully laid plan would be set in motion, one that would carry them through Angel Island's defenses and eventually far beyond into the blue horizon of Bika. Nethin was the one who'd agreed to guide Robin here, to the ancient stone tablet she'd been desperate to find. Robin turned to him, studying his calm expression. It wasn't that she doubted his words, it was that he seemed almost too familiar with this place. How did he know the tablet was here? Had their captain ever been to this secluded isle before? "It's simple," Nethin said, folding his hands behind his back. "Nothing in this world escapes my notice, not even a floating island like this one." Robin tilted her head, a skeptical smile tugging at her lips. "So, you really do know what happened during that blank century, 800 years ago?" Nethin's features didn't betray a hint of emotion. "If I just told you, you'd lose the drive to uncover it yourself. The truth only matters when you discover it." Robin laughed softly, covering her mouth with one hand. "Fair enough." Without another word, Nethin stepped forward, placed a firm hand on Robin's shoulder, and activated his devil fruit power, the ability to twist gravity's pull. In an instant, both of them slipped free of the island's invisible shackles and soared upward, leaving the ruins, and their questions, far behind. Chapter 94, Ancient Weapon. A peculiar force thrummed all around Robin, throwing her balance off. She twisted in midair, nearly flipping head over heels, but Nethin's firm grip kept her steady. Without a word, she allowed Rhodes to steer her up at an angle. As they climbed, Robin craned her neck skyward and saw a thick veil of clouds stretching endlessly above them. Rhodes laid a hand on her shoulder and joined her in gazing upward. 400 years ago, he began, a section of an island along the Grand Route was carried aloft by a mighty sky current. That floating land is the ancient city of Chandora, what Sky Islanders revere as the holy land of Apayado. Before Robin fully registered his words, they had left Angel Island far behind and soared toward Apayado, which hovered not far off. From their vantage point, a colossal vine sprang from the island's center, its trunk vaulted skyward, disappearing into those impenetrable clouds. Rhodes's deep well of historical knowledge never ceased to amaze her. Robin stared at the gargantuan vine, her dark pupils reflecting equal parts awe and curiosity. What ancient power lay hidden within this legendary land? Robin stared at Nethin in disbelief. That was clearly ancient lore, yet he recited it flawlessly. She couldn't shake the suspicion that he hadn't grown up among the Sky Islanders. After all, every islander bore wings on their back, and Nethin's shoulders were bare. He couldn't have hidden them, much less torn them off. Rhodes offered a half-smile. "I know more than you think. If you're curious, I can show you deeper truths." Robin hesitated. There was something odd in Rhodes's tone, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Before she could inquire further, Rhodes swept into the air, and Nethin followed. They glided over the sacred fields of Apayado until a colossal vine loomed ahead, twisting its way into the heavens. Together, the three ascended along its length, piercing the cloud layer, until they alighted on a small floating isle. The cloud isle measured barely a few dozen meters across. At its center stood an imposing golden bell, untouched for 4 centuries. Its surface gleamed with intricate reliefs, each panel whispering tales of a bygone civilization. Drawn by its silent majesty, Robin moved closer, her heart pounding. At the bell's foot, she traced her fingers over the fine etchings. Beautifully preserved lines of text formed an ancient stele, the very foundation of the bell itself. History lay carved into gold, and Robin felt its pull as if it had been waiting only for her. Robin Sue brushed her fingers across the ancient glyphs etched into the stone tablet, fighting to keep her racing heart steady. She read the lines in silence, her vision growing misty with restrained emotion. Can you make sense of this? Nethan stepped forward, his voice soft. Robin's eyes flickered, and after a brief hesitation, she bowed her head. It records the god-named ancient weapon and the Sea King's whereabouts. At her words, Nethan offered a small, knowing smile. It continues, set your course for the juncture of the Red Earth continent and the Great Road. There, hidden deep beneath the waves, lies Mermaid Island. Robin stared at him in stunned silence. His interpretation matched the tablet's message exactly. How could he already know so much about this secret lore? In their world, only the scholars of Ohara possessed the skill to unravel such historical inscriptions, and Robin herself was the last surviving member of that storied order. Yet here was Nethan, reading it as though it were nothing more difficult than a children's tale. He met her gaze calmly and returned his attention to the tablet, tracing the ancient symbols as if they were old friends. The stone tablet of the Void Isle, the very one chronicled in Rhodes's private archives, holds the secret coordinates of the legendary weapon known as the Sea King. Nethan had only asked Robin to translate it so he could see what she would record about the age of antiquity. Once deciphered, the tablet pointed unmistakably to the Sea King's resting place. Still, although Nethan now knew both of the Sea King's existence and the fact that the location of Hades lay concealed within the stone tablet of Alabasta, he had no intention of chasing after these weapons just yet. Without sufficient power, laying hands on an ancient weapon is pointless. Any naval admiral the government dispatched could seize it in an instant. Only when he had reached the level where he could stand toe-to-toe with a Navy admiral would the Sea King or Hades truly serve as a deterrent. Robin bowed her head in silence. Thoughts swirled through her mind faster than she could contain them. Never before had she felt such confusion. Did Rhodes really possess the whole truth of the lost century? Should she confront him again and demand answers? But if she learned everything he knew, if the shattering puzzles of her past were finally made clear, then, as Rhodes warned, she might lose the very purpose that had driven her life. And if that happened, she didn't know who she would be, or what she would fight for. Nethan stepped forward to the base of the golden clock and traced a new line of slanted script with his finger, pulling Robin abruptly out of her thoughts. She raised her head and followed his gesture, her eyes widening in stunned confusion and a rare spark of shock flashing across her face. I've come to carry this chronicle to the ends of the world. Gol D. Roger, she read aloud, voice trembling. Gol D. Roger, the Pirate King? Did he really set foot on Sky Island? And why carve these words here? Robin felt as though an invisible thread ran before her, tying together every clue she'd gathered. Yet amid the swirl of her thoughts, she couldn't grasp its shape. If it wasn't only Ohara's scholars who could decipher this ancient text, then who else? Nethan's calm voice answered her unspoken question. All the secrets of the Void Century, every hint Roger uncovered, he brought here and left them on Raftel. Robin turned to face him, her dark eyes blazing with disbelief. Could it be? Nethan had actually been to Raftel? He offered no words in reply, only a serene smile and a slight nod. Some conquer the world through sheer strength. Others, like Lafitte, combine power with a razor-sharp mind. Robin, however, insisted on a third quality in anyone who might challenge her, a depth of knowledge that outshines her own. Nethan understood this better than anyone. He wasn't seeking equals as comrades, the way the Straw Hats did. He wanted clear lines between captain and crew. Let's move, he said before Robin could voice another doubt. Far below, the island drifted in a sea of mist. Ancient ruins, centuries old, peeked from beneath overgrown foliage. Nethan strode to the edge of the luminous white cloud that served as their platform, staring down at the holy land of Apayado. Silence stretched for a heartbeat, then Robin joined him, her eyes flicking between the captain and the island. She opened her mouth, then thought better of it. Somehow she knew Nethan was right. If she truly wanted answers, she'd have to seek them herself. Chi. With a single, concentrated thought, Nethan tore the soft cloud away from beneath their boots. The mist shivered, split in two, and the two of them dropped through the sky toward Apayado's ancient stones. Winds roared in their ears, and Robin's hair whipped around her face. All she could think was that this moment, more than any other, would test every bit of her strength, her mind, and her knowledge against the secrets awaiting them below. Robin fell silent for a moment, remembering how Nethan had lifted her up before. At last she looked at him and asked, "Why didn't you use this method the last time you were here?" Nethan's expression stayed calm. "I haven't quite mastered this new technique yet," he admitted. Chapter 95. The roar of battle thundered across Apayado's northern shore, where the sea's currents had long ago beached the island's sands. Here, under a sky streaked with smoke, steel met steel in unrelenting clash. Soldiers of the Angel Islanders and the Sandians fought hand to hand, each side desperate to honor its 4-century-old claim. 400 years back, a great landmass, Apayado, had drifted onto the floating realm known as Angel Island. Its people seized it at once, declaring it a divine gift and consecrating it as holy ground. The Sandians, displaced and furious, swore to reclaim what was theirs. Ever since, the two nations had been locked in an endless war. Boom! A spear of crackling energy cut through the air as God Ganfor, ruler of Angel Island, hurled himself into the fray. With one mighty thrust, he sent a charging Sandian soldier tumbling into the dust. Raising his voice above the din, Ganfor bellowed to the advancing Sandian ranks, "Apayado was granted to us by the gods. None may defile its sanctity." Boom! From the opposite flank, a younger figure stepped forward. Clad in desert-worn armor, the war ghost Weber gripped a cannon forged of compressed shell energy. His weapon roared, and an Angel Islander flew backward in a spray of sand. Weber's voice was cold as ice. "You speak of divine right? You who stole our homeland have no claim to it. Apayado belongs to the Sandians." A wall of Angel Island's divine guards surged between the two leaders, their halos of light blazing bright. They bristled with righteous fury and cried in unison, "Madman, dare you defile our holy ground? Begone to the depths of hell." The two armies stood locked in deadly standoff. 4 centuries of hatred distilled into a single moment of fearful silence before the next wave of steel would fall. A vast phalanx of divine guardians surged forward, colliding with War Ghost Weber and his unit. The Sky Islanders outnumbered them 2-1 and fielded higher-grade equipment, but Weber's squad fought with such brutal skill that the battle quickly stalled in a tense stalemate. Amid the thunder of clashing steel and crackling magic, 2 figures suddenly materialized at the jungle's edge and strode into the fray. Robin watched with tight focus, her dark eyes glinting beneath the canopy's shadows. Years spent in the underground world had shown her every face of darkness, yet something deep inside her still ached for peace. War has a way of erasing history, and the conflict between Sky Islanders and Shandians had raged for 4 long centuries. Beside her, Nethan stood perfectly still on a moss-slick boulder, hands clasped behind his back, silently surveying the distant battlefield. Nethan hesitated only for a moment, then turned and led the way down a steep, narrow path carved into the cliffside. "We're on Apayado's upper terrace," he explained over his shoulder. "The ruins below have been hidden for centuries. No one has ever managed to find them. Follow me." Robin cast one last glance at the distant skirmish, then tore her gaze away and moved to follow. But before she could take more than a couple of steps, a lethal arrow sliced through the air, aimed straight for her heart. Shock registered on her face. There was no time to dodge. At the last instant, Nethan's hand shot out, slamming onto the arrow's shaft and deflecting it away. The slender projectile quivered beneath his grip. He turned the trembling arrow over in his hand and shook his head, rueful. He had overlooked a crucial truth. The people of Sky Island wielded knowledge like a weapon. Their intellectual arrogance, what they called the Heart Network, set them apart from everyone else. Their aptitude was extraordinary. Some were even born with the Heart Network itself, an innate dominance of arcane lore. It's strange that someone so close went unnoticed. "Who's there? Reinforcements for the sinners? Don't hide!" A Sky Island guard, with bow drawn, glared across the rustling bushes at Nethan and Robin, his voice sharp and accusing. Nethan shook his head. He had no wish to join the battle between the Shandians and the Sky Islanders, but that dark arrow had come out of nowhere and almost struck Robin. A flash of resolve crossed his features as he stepped forward. "I'll teach them some manners," he muttered, emerging from the undergrowth with an arrow still nocked. "Stay back, Robin." Robin's eyes widened. Had Nathan not been there, she would have been hit. Grateful yet tense, she held her breath as he advanced toward the skirmish. Calm but commanding, Nathan called out to the opposing ranks, "Who fired that shot?" Nathan stood alone between two armies on the high plateau, Sky Islanders to his left, Shandians to his right, yet he seemed wholly out of place. All around him, warriors bore great white wings that glinted like polished ivory in the morning sun. He had none. His simple tunic and trousers, too, contrasted sharply with their gleaming armor and flowing ceremonial robes. The deputy captain of the Sky Island White Beret Squadron, Captain Apayado, frowned and knocked an arrow in one swift motion. "Who are you?" he demanded, voice echoing across the field. "A member of the Qinghai clans, perhaps? The Holy Land is strictly sealed. No outsider may set foot here. Unauthorized entry is a third-degree crime subject to the severest penalty." A cold gleam passed over the eyes of the Shandian high priest, second in authority only to Grandfather Gonfor himself. He surveyed Nathan with contempt, then turned to the Sky Island soldiers arrayed behind Apayado. "These trespassers will die alongside you," he declared, his tone as frigid as the mountain winds. Raising a slender hand, he gave the unyielding order, "Fire!" As the taut strings twanged and arrows sliced the air in unison, Nathan braced himself, alone, unwinged, and facing the wrath of two great peoples. Nathan barely had time to react when an arrow and several spears tore through the air, cutting off every escape route. The lead spear, wreathed in howling wind, thrust directly at him. Unfazed, Nathan gave a single snap of his fingers. The wind-twisted shaft creaked and snapped in two, clattering to the ground. The remaining spears whipped against him like harmless twigs, their tips bouncing off as though striking an invisible barrier. With unwavering composure, Nathan turned his gaze to the White Beret Troop's vice-captain, a tall officer knocking another arrow to his longbow, and simply walked on. Around him, Sky Islanders and Shandia warriors froze in astonishment. Some raised their weapons hesitantly, others exchanged uncertain glances. Before anyone could act, the earth beneath their feet roiled as if alive. Mud and gravel melted into a rising quagmire that swallowed bodies up to the neck, trapping them in a writhing mass. Only bobbing heads betrayed their desperate struggle. Nathan did not pause. Step by deliberate step, he pressed into the heart of the battlefield, each footfall carrying him closer to his unspoken goal. Chapter 7. Judgment of the Earth. Nathan's footsteps fell with unerring precision, each stride identical in pace and length. Around him, the gathered Skylanders and Sandians watched in stunned silence. It was true what the elders had always said. Centuries come and go, empires rise and collapse, but the earth endures. Like fish in water, no creature could survive beyond its soil. Whether on a barren isle or the high plateaus of Qinghai, life was inseparable from the ground beneath its feet. Then, without warning, the earth thundered. Cracks splintered outward in 100-meter radius, and molten mud surged up like a furious tide. Dozens of Skylanders and Sandians cried out as they were swept into the suffocating slurry of rock and sludge. Priestess Ganfur's face went ashen, and the circle of priests around her stumbled back. Even War Ghost Weber, hardened warrior of countless battles, could only gape in disbelief as Nathan pressed on, step by deliberate step. Wherever he walked, the land itself seemed to bow down, forging a scar of churned earth and splintered stone in his wake. Between the raucous gurgle of mud and the shouts of the trapped, a fearsome voice echoed through everyone's mind. "This is the holy land of Apajado, gift of the gods 4 centuries past. You were entrusted with its care, yet you have forsaken your prayers and your piety." Nathan raised his arm, and the roiling tide of earth halted instantly, freezing like a dark mirror. Priestess Ganfur and her attendants thrashed uselessly, half buried in the quicksand of their own hubris. Silence fell heavy as Nathan's gaze bore into them. His voice, when it came, was calm but unyielding. "Let this be your reckoning. The earth remembers every oath broken, every prayer left unspoken. Stand now and repent, or be claimed by the land you so disdained." A trembling "Hoo-woe" broke from Ganfur's lips as the ground beneath her clenched tighter, sealing her fate. All around, the priests and warriors quivered, realizing that this was no ordinary display of power, but the earth itself enacting divine judgment. The ground gave way without warning. In a roaring, earth-shattering instant, the soil buckled and rolled up like a monstrous wave, engulfing every man, woman, and child in its path. Rocks and dirt coalesced into a looming 100-meter-wide mountain, burying the onlookers beneath its weight. No one could tear themselves free from that living wall of stone. All eyes turned to Rhodes, the commander standing at the heart of the upheaval. Shock registered on every face. Some Sky Islanders dropped to their knees, bodies trembling. "God?" someone whispered, voice cracking. But there were no gods here. Not in 4 centuries of endless war had a deity ever revealed itself. A sudden roar cut through the stunned silence. The war ghost Weber hefted his incendiary cannon with iron determination. "Incendiary cannon!" he bellowed, slamming his palm against the firing plate. A torrent of blue-white flame burst forth, streaking straight for Nethan. Nethan didn't dodge. He didn't flinch. Instead, he thrust out a palm, and the ground answered. Without warning, the very earth beneath Weber's feet surged up, swallowing the cannon in a cascade of boulders and soil. The flames sputtered and died beneath that sudden avalanche of rock. Above the roar of shifting stone, a single truth rang out. Human greed had spawned this war, a conflict that had devoured generations for 400 years. No benevolent god stepped in to save them. Mortals cared as little for each other's suffering as ants squabbling on a fallen log. All this devastation had begun with the snap of a single finger, centuries ago, and now it would take more than fire or fury to undo what had been set in motion. Nethan stood perfectly still, then lifted his left hand and snapped his fingers. In that instant, the earth itself seemed to roar. Chunks of gravel and soil erupted around the war ghost Weber, cocooning him in a spinning shell of rock that shot skyward like a colossal meteor. As the mass ascended, tiny fissures began to spider across its surface. Then, with a sudden crack, the stony shell shattered. Weber's form plummeted back to the jungle floor, unconscious. "This is your punishment for your arrogance," Nethan said coolly, his eyes sweeping over the stunned onlookers. He didn't wait for a reaction. Turning his back on the battlefield, he strode into the distant jungle and vanished among the tangled undergrowth. Early April, year 12 of the Great Pirate Era. Word of Nethan's display spread faster than wildfire. In the Holy Land of Apayado, the Earth God himself descended to chastise humanity's boundless greed. In the presence of the divine emissary, Ganfor, the leader of Angel Island, and the chief of the Shandian tribe bowed their heads in genuine repentance. They offered prayers of atonement, erected a grand statue in honor of the Earth God, and sealed their contrition with a solemn peace treaty. Thus, after 4 centuries of unrelenting conflict, the war finally came to an end. Chapter 96. 7 Months. After Robin finished her careful survey of the ancient Shandola ruins, Lafitte returned to the ship, carrying a battered chart that detailed an uncharted island. Sky Islands along the Grand Air route may not rival the crowded isles of the maritime lanes in sheer numbers, but they are still plentiful. On the handful of scattered maps Lafitte had uncovered, 7 or 8 islands were marked. Captain Nethan laid several of those maps across the deck, studied them briefly, then pressed a finger against a tiny isle sketched on the edge of one. "This must be Bika," he said quietly. "Navigating around a void island isn't fundamentally different from any open-sea voyage." "Understood, Captain," Lafitte replied, tapping his cane. He didn't ask why Nethan wanted to go to Bika. Since setting foot on Sky Island, his captain had grown more inscrutable than ever. Whatever secret drove him was his alone to share. With the chart secured, the crew unfurled the sails. The wind filled the canvas, and the ship slipped into a steady course toward Bika, the next stop on their unfolding journey. During that time, the Navy and the world government poured every available asset into hunting the ghost hand pirates along the Grand Route. But the infamous crew had simply vanished after leaving Alcaria. Rumors swirled that Nethan and his comrades might have been swallowed by a rogue storm, yet few believed ordinary weather could destroy a band so seasoned. As days turned into weeks, the feverish search inevitably lost momentum. New emergencies demanded attention, and no intelligence network could stay fixated on a single target forever. especially one that left no clues in its wake. Aboard a world government cruiser patrolling Alcaria's waters, an intelligence operative with black, curly hair and a small pigeon perched on his shoulder finally tossed a malfunctioning bugging device across the deck. He stared out at the restless sea, his jaw clenched. "Where did they go?" he muttered under his breath. A month later, the Ghost Hand pirates slipped quietly into the port of Bika. 3 months had passed since Nethin's lightning strike on Bika, and still no trace of the Thunderfruit. It was almost unbelievable how swiftly he'd crushed the island's defenses. In a single day, Nethin overwhelmed every tribal chief and warrior, seized control of Bika, and installed a tight occupation force. He then dispatched Robin and Lafitte to scour every ruin, cave, and secret grotto for the legendary Devil Fruit said to grant mastery over storms, and for 2 long months they turned up nothing. Then Nethin himself encountered Anilu, the young islander rumored to be the fruit's true holder. But the boy had never eaten it, and Nethin found him of no further interest. So the search pressed on. Another month, another dead end. Back on the ocean routes, news of the Ghost Hand pirates fell into eerie silence. Whispers circulated in every port town tavern and dockside alley. They vanished. Surely the world government or the navy crushed them in some secret strike. A seasoned pirate hunter nursed a mug of ale at the Drowned Gull. He shook his head whenever anyone mentioned the Ghost Hands. Who knows? If they were wiped out, the bounties would have been revoked. As long as those wanted posters stay up, they're still out there, somewhere. For a moment, it had seemed that Nethin was the great wave destined to reshape the New World's tides. But waves crest and break, and now that shock had been swallowed by the endless whitecaps. Far from Bika, more startling headlines were bombarding the Grand Line. Red-haired Shanks has lost an arm. The kingdom of Sispka's strongest swordsman throws down his gauntlet. Hawkeye has been challenged. As the sea churned with fresh rumors and fresh conflicts, one thing remained certain: the hunt for the Thunderfruit and the fate of the Ghost Hand pirates was far from over. The Beast Pirates and the Big Mom Pirates have locked horns on the high seas, each new development propelling the world forward. Yet as these 2 titanic crews dominate the headlines, the Ghost Hand pirates have slowly slipped from memory. 7 months later, on Sky Island Bika, billowing white clouds formed the very fabric of the island's spires and walkways, giving it the appearance of a citadel suspended in heaven's domain. At the heart of this celestial realm lay a vast open courtyard where the sharp crack of combat rang out. Nethin moved like lightning, his palms a blur as he switched seamlessly between strikes, parries, and shoves. Robin stood her ground in the center, eyes keenly tracking his every feint. She swayed aside, ducked beneath a sweeping blow, and twisted away from a sudden thrust, each dodge executed with measured precision. Beads of sweat formed on her forehead, each one a testament to the relentless pace, yet she never lost her footing, only occasionally feeling the sting of Nethin's grazing palms. On the final exchange, Nethin lunged forward, planting a solid palm against Robin's chest. With a subtle twist of her torso, she slipped free at the last second, eluding the strike's full force. Nethin halted abruptly, stepped back, and let his hand drop. A satisfied smile tugged at his lips as he offered her a respectful nod, acknowledgement that she had met his challenge and held her own. Over the past 7 months, while Robin pored over the histories of Bika and Kongdao, she'd also devoted herself to mastering Haki, both Conquerors and Observation. To her surprise, the path to Observation Haki proved remarkably clear compared to Conquerors, making it infinitely easier to learn. Gifted with sharp perception and an unflappable temperament, she absorbed every lesson with astonishing speed. One afternoon, Robin opened her eyes, a playful glint in them, and looked directly at Nethin. "You know," she drawled, emphasizing the word, "captains get tested all the time. Of course you have to learn faster." Nethin's expression didn't flicker. "Then you should thank me," he said plainly. "It's part of a captain's job." Robin's smile curved into something almost dangerous as she held his gaze. Nethin glanced up at the sky and murmured to himself, 7 months. He'd been stranded on this empty island for half a year, far longer than he ever intended. His plan had been to stay 3 to 5 months at most before moving on. But the Thunderfruit remained elusive, and the days stretched on endlessly. He'd simply underestimated how long it would take. Even if Nethan could pinpoint where the thunder fruit might surface, that didn't mean he could claim it easily. Over the past 7 months, he devoted himself to training, honing his gravity-twisting technique and pushing his body to new limits. Still, this steady progress was nothing compared to the thrill of racing down the Grand Line, hunting pirate crews from one shore to the next, and clashing with admirals. It was time to move on. Nethan exhaled softly. A half-year of endless drills and sparring sessions had tested his patience. At least Robin was there to spar with him whenever he needed. Plus, the secluded island had its own rugged charm. He'd seen how Blackbeard spent over a decade with the Whitebeard pirates chasing the dark fruit, but Nethan wouldn't tie himself to any crew just for a devil fruit that, to him, wasn't worth that price. Besides, what if the thunder fruit didn't reappear for years, and the moment it did, some Sky Islander snatched it up and devoured it? All this time wasted on an empty promise would be unforgivable. Nethan, empowered by his twisted fruit and guided by the talent system, had no urgent need for the thunder fruit. With his gravity-bending ability, he could slip back to the empty island at will. There was no reason to remain tethered there forever. More importantly, he couldn't let the legend of Ghost Hand fade from the minds of the Navy's top brass. When Robin learned that Nethan would finally depart the empty island after more than 6 months, he couldn't hide his excitement. Life on this remote shore had been far gentler than life at sea. No naval patrols to dodge, no intelligence to gather, but it also meant forgoing the chance to recover the ancient stone tablets and unlock the century-old secrets they held. It was time to set sail once more. Chapter 97, Return to Qinghai. Ho ho ho, planning to depart already? Lafitte called out, leaning back in his usual pose. He adjusted the brim of his top hat and offered a courteous nod, his signature blend of elegance and mischief. Nethan laughed softly. 7 months on the Sky Islands have left me restless, he admitted, and despite all your efforts to track down a new devil fruit, we haven't uncovered so much as a rumor. Lafitte's smile didn't waver. It's been dreadfully dull, I agree, but Rhodes' orders were clear. Lie low until the heat from the world government and the Navy cools off. Better to endure boredom here than invite a full-scale pursuit. Nethan waved off the concern. True, and I have to say, you haven't lost your edge. In fact, Lafitte's skills had sharpened in unexpected ways during their enforced hiatus. While he still wouldn't dare take on a vice admiral single-handedly, a Marine captain would be in for a tough fight. And you, Lafitte added, eyes glinting. Robin has grown stronger, too. If I've improved by 1 notch since we entered the New World, she's leapt ahead by 2. She's more than capable of matching any Marine commander. Nethan grinned, anticipation clear in his eyes. Soon enough, the captain will see for himself just how ready we are. Lafitte chuckled again, straightening his coat. Ho ho ho, let's set sail for Qinghai then. Adventure awaits. Lafitte steadied his cane, spreading his arms in a gracious gesture, and offered me a confident smile. Give the order for the Bika tribe to resume their search for the devil fruit, he said. Once they find it, they must hand it over at once to their chief for safekeeping. I nodded. Very well. For the past 7 months, the Bika people had been utterly compliant, first under Lafitte's sway and then mine. Their chief and priests had fallen, one by one, to Lafitte's powerful hypnosis, and the subsequent indoctrination left them too fearful to oppose us. Even if the thunder fruit were discovered, they would instinctively conceal it, trembling at the thought of defying our command and waiting instead for me to return. With a courteous bow, Lafitte fell back and turned toward the island's interior. I allowed myself a moment to ensure everything was in place, then set off for the shore with Robin at my side. The path led us swiftly to the pier, where the ghost shadow rocked gently at its moorings. A small contingent of sailors clustered on deck. I stepped aboard and instructed them to welcome 3 Bika tribesmen I had chosen as our special passengers. The first was a young man of formidable build, his strength said to rival that of any chief or priest on the island. Accompanying him were 2 women, one an expert in fine craftsmanship, capable of fashioning tools or trinkets with uncanny precision, and the other skilled in herbal lore, her knowledge of native plants rivaling even the island priests. With the sails unfurled and the wind catching in the rigging, the ghost shadow lifted from the pier. As the shoreline drifted away, I glanced back at the dense jungle beyond, Lafitte already directing his tribe's efforts to find the thunder fruit. Somewhere out there, the fruit lay hidden, waiting for us to claim it, and once we did, its power would be ours alone. Nithin stood on the deck, watching the last of the crew settle into their stations. The two newest additions, a burly cook and a 17-year-old former acolyte training for the priesthood, had just come aboard. The young priest in training had once served in a cathedral, living the quiet life of an elf-like devotee, but he'd found his calling too small and drifted to the sea, hoping for something greater. Nithin approved. Even though Robin could handle every task herself, it was always wise to have capable partners to share the load. On this ship, Nithin's authority went unchallenged. At his side stood Lafitte and Robin, both members of the senior cadre. The rest of the crew ranked equally beneath them. Once Lafitte had delivered Nithin's orders, he swung back aboard the Ghost and prepared to weigh anchor. Their next destination, the North Blue. When Lafitte rejoined the group, Nithin spoke with calm precision. "We need a ship's doctor." He'd been torn between two prospects for weeks. On one hand was the elusive Poison Q of the Blackbeard pirates, a name whispered in hushed tones but with no reliable leads. On the other was Trafalgar D. Waterlaw, the feared surgeon of death. Law had always seemed too young for such a post, and every scrap of information on Poison Q had proved dead ends. Finally, Nithin made his decision. They would sail to the North Blue in search of Law. Law was 7 years younger than Monkey D. Luffy, which put him at about 15 years old now, old enough to have outgrown childish folly, yet still yearning for purpose and direction. It was precisely the moment to bring him into their fold. With that resolve, Nithin gave the order to set their course, confident that the young surgeon would prove a perfect addition to their crew. Nithin checked his log one last time and confirmed what they'd already suspected. The rendezvous point was locked in, and their captain had been appointed. Lafitte let a small smile spread across his face. Having a dedicated ship's doctor aboard would eliminate any worries about facing a powerful foe, being seriously wounded, and then unable to recover. Even the routine cuts and illnesses that came with life at sea would be taken care of. But the real prize, as far as Lafitte was concerned, was Nithin himself. His uncanny vision for talent meant that anyone he chose was bound to be strong and reliable. "All right, let's move," Rhodes said, nodding once. He eased his foot down on the pedal. Instantly, the Ghost shadow shuddered, its engines roaring to life. Below them, the rolling sea clouds parted on either side, and the water itself seemed to crack open in a swath hundreds of meters across. In an instant, the Ghost shadow plunged into the sudden chasm and vanished from sight. A few days later, aboard a world government cruiser, a pigeon-pecking Den Mushi chirped impatiently. On the ship's polished deck stood Rob Lucci, known throughout the world government as the strongest operative in CP9's 8th-century history, his sharp gaze hidden beneath the brim of a top hat. He lifted the coiled transmitter to his ear and waited for the connection to click through. Over 6 months ago, the world government entrusted Nithin with a single, deadly mission: silently eliminate the Ghost Hand Rhodes and covertly apprehend Nico Robin, the Devil's Child. 7 long months have passed, and now, according to the intercepted report piped through the bugged phone, the Ghost Hand pirates have finally resurfaced, in Beihai of all places. Nithin's jaw tightened as he listened. Could they really have shown up here? Standing beside him, Spandam had been following every word that crackled through the transmission. A flash of irritation crossed his face. For half a year, every failure to corner the Ghost Hand pirates had dragged down CP9's reputation, denying him any glory. If Lucci and the others hadn't been tied up by this one assignment, their efficiency would have earned them accolades long ago. Credit that Spandam's father had used his influence to hand to him when he was appointed CP9's commander. Now, once again, the unresolved threat of those pirates hung over them both. Serve in CP9 for 8 or 10 years, and a promotion into the government's upper echelons is practically guaranteed. One day, you'll be looking down on the entire sea from your lofty perch. Rob Lucci hated Officer Spandam more fiercely than any pirate he had ever faced. To Lucci, weakness was a sin, and in his eyes, Spandam couldn't even hold a candle to a fire-gun soldier in combat. But Spandam was an officer of the world government, drilled from childhood to obey every order to the letter. Lucci gritted his teeth, stifled his contempt, and signaled that the listening bug was cut off. Then he turned on his heel. "The ghost hand pirates have resurfaced in the North Sea," he reported. "I say we go after them immediately. Your thoughts?" Spandam froze for a heartbeat. He had no desire to chase criminals halfway across the ocean, yet the world government's mandate had already slipped 6 months behind schedule. Worse still, news of the pirates' resurgence would mean inexcusable failure on his watch. He swallowed hard and nodded. "All right, alert the North Sea Fleet and have them stand by for support." With that, the two agents set their plan in motion, one driven by duty, the other by unwavering conviction in the ruthless justice he served. Spandam tapped the map uneasily. "No," he said, "we shouldn't split our forces. Let the Grand Line branch send its warships straight to the North Sea instead." His caution wasn't unfounded. Ghost Hand Rhodes had already slaughtered the naval branch's elite, killing even King Chiwuhai Crocodile in the process. Spandam trusted Lu Chi and the others with his life, but he was no stranger to risk aversion. For a man who valued self-preservation above all else, stability was the only acceptable course. Lu Chi sighed. He didn't like Spandam's constant hedging, but Spandam was the commander of CP9. His word was law unless someone was prepared to betray the world government itself. With nowhere else to channel his frustration, Lu Chi's gaze hardened on the real enemy, the Ghost Hand pirates, whose elusive tactics had kept them stranded at sea for more than half a year. "We've wasted enough time," Lu Chi muttered under his breath. "With only 4 months left on this 1-year mission, I won't tolerate another disappearing act." He unfolded the chart again, steeling himself for the pursuit. The Ghost Hand pirates had slipped through their nets once, never again. Chapter 98, Trafalgaro, January, the 13th year of the Great Pirate Age. North Sea, a vast island, lay before him. Its glittering center was home to nobles and the merchant elite. Its outskirts were little more than teeming slums and heaps of refuse. A colossal stone wall cut the island in two, separating the prosperous inner district from the poverty-stricken outer ring. Deep in one of the darkest alleyways, a hooded teenager crept forward, a battered satchel strapped across his back. His name was Nethan, a devil fruit user and the sole heir of the Don Quixote family's Red Heart branch. He had abandoned his heritage at 13 and spent the past 3 years surviving in the North Sea's criminal underworld. He was not yet 16. As he took 2 cautious steps, Nethan froze. He raised his head, sensing rather than seeing a presence ahead. "He's here," came a low, surprised voice from the gloom. 7 or 8 figures, dressed entirely in black, materialized out of the deeper shadows of the alley. They closed in swiftly, their footsteps silent on the wet cobblestones. Before Nethan could react, someone slipped out from behind a pile of discarded crates and blocked his retreat. The newcomer's stance was firm, unyielding, its owner clearly trained in the art of confrontation. Nethan's pulse quickened. His hand brushed against the hilt of his knife, but before he could draw it, the ring of assailants tightened around him. "Not much choice now," the voice from the front muttered. Its owner stepped into the dim light, revealing a cold grin. Nethan swallowed. He squared his shoulders, prepared for whatever came next. In the heart of the slums, no one would come to his rescue, and he had neither allies nor witnesses. Only the night, the criminals, and the whisper of fate closing in around him. Nethan remained eerily composed despite the circle of rough-looking men closing in on him. "I'm sorry," he said calmly, "but I'm not taking any patients tonight. If anyone has a real injury, come back tomorrow." He'd been tending broken limbs in this city's slums for over half a year, charging steep fees to patch fractured arms and legs in his makeshift underground clinic. Here, gang violence and death were so routine that a shattered bone barely earned a second glance. Yet these visitors hadn't come for medical care. A tall figure detached himself from the darkness and stepped forward. His voice was quiet, amused. "Dr. Rado. No, Trafalgaro. That's your real name, isn't it? A prodigy at your age. It's impressive, but we didn't come for treatment." He lowered the hood covering his head. Scars webbed across his face, and only one eye remained. that lone, ruthless orb fixed on Nethan, as though sizing him up like some priceless specimen. The scarred, one-eyed man grinned, a vicious gleam twisting his smile. "The Don Quixote family's put up 100 million Baileys for you in the underworld," he announced. "Save yourself the trouble. Come along quietly." At the mention of Don Quixote, Nethan's face darkened. He tipped the brim of his hat down, hiding his expression in shadow, then drew his demon sword, nearly as tall as he was, and planted it in the ground beside him. "That's a generous offer," he said evenly, "but you won't see a single Bailey of it unless you earn it." The scarred man snorted and waved away the challenge, turning to his two henchmen with a dismissive flick of his wrist. The pair exchanged eager grins and stepped forward. After all, with a bounty that huge, they stood to walk away with hundreds of thousands of Baileys each. As the crew closed in on Nethan, he moved in a heartbeat. With one hand he drew Ghost Cry, and with the other he splayed his fingers wide. A shimmering, translucent membrane sprang to life on his palm, and in an instant ballooned into a vast dome. In that same split second, Nethan and one of the henchmen switched places. The black blade in his hand sang as it sliced through the air, and before anyone could react, several of the pirates around him were cleaved in two. Oddly, there was no blue, only the silent, pristine halves of bodies. Yet the victims' terrified shrieks rang out, as though dismemberment hadn't robbed them of consciousness. I'm dead, they wailed. "My body, what's happening?" Their voices faltered in panic, trapped in limbs they could no longer command. A cold dread rippled through the crew. Suddenly, the rumor made grim sense. This kid had eaten a devil fruit, and the Don Quixote family had put up 100 million berries for his head. The scarred, one-eyed lieutenant stared at the carnage, his voice barely more than a breath. What power is this? No wonder the Don Quixote family put up 100 million belly bounty on him, a devil fruit user, yet still only a kid. The officer sneered, and, as if from thin air, produced a bizarre three-pronged blade. In a single flash, he lunged at Nethan, slamming the weapon into his shoulder. His plan was obvious: incapacitate the boy and deliver him alive. After all, a dead prisoner couldn't earn anyone a penny. Nethan barely blinked. He tilted his head, eyes cool, and summoned the ghost scream, a silent, razor-sharp wave of energy that he unleashed from his hand. In an instant, it cut through the man's torso, cleaving chest from waist. The two halves of the body collapsed in a single, gruesome heap on the cobblestones. A cold, humorless laugh escaped Nethan's lips. He didn't give the others time to recover. Like a phantom, he struck again and again, each ghost scream whittling down the dozen or so pursuers, bones cleaving, limbs scattering, bodies falling in pieces. When the last would-be captor lay in ruin, Nethan finally stilled. More than 10 bodies were strewn across the street. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple, the only sign that, for him, battle still carried its price. Nethan knelt beside the wounded boy, forcing his fingers into the ragged gash. The kid wasn't even 16 yet, no match for this kind of trauma. "Hold on, the doctor's coming," he murmured. Rising with steely calm, he surveyed the carnage, severed limbs, shattered arms, and crushed heads strewn across the street like grotesque trophies. He drew Ghost Cry in one fluid motion, slashing at the walls on both sides of the road. The blade bit through brick and mortar at the building's base before he snapped it back into its sheath. Boom! The structure behind him folded inward, sending a thunderous roar and billowing dust into the night. Screams died on terrified lips as onlookers froze in shock. Without hesitation, Nethan slipped away from the wreckage, ducking into a narrow, shadowed alley before the crowd could converge. He'd gone only a few steps when a voice hissed inches from his ear. "Ho ho ho! I found you." A jolt of dread raced down his spine, every hair on his body standing on end, his pupils pinched into slits. Instinct took over. He dove forward, rolled twice in rapid succession, then sprang nearly 10 meters ahead. Only then did he risk glancing back. Nethan sidestepped and caught sight of a pale stranger standing just behind him. The man was unnervingly still, his skin almost white beneath a tall, black top hat, and in one gloved hand he casually twirled a slender red cane. A cold smile curved his lips. "Who are you?" Nethan asked, every muscle coiled like a spring. He regarded the newcomer as if facing a sworn enemy, one hand drifting to the hilt of his sword, Giku, and slipping the blade free just enough to feel its reassuring weight. He hadn't even noticed the man approach, and now he stood barely an arm's length away. If Lafitte had meant harm, Nathan wouldn't have had time to react. Lafitte only shrugged, that strange grin never wavering. "It doesn't matter who I am," he said softly. "What matters is that our captain wants to see you." Chapter 99, Chips. Luo fixed Lafitte with a cool stare. After a few moments of silence, he asked, "And if I refuse to go?" Lafitte shrugged casually, a faint grin playing on his lips. "Well, if you don't show up, I'll be in a pretty awkward spot. This assignment came straight from the captain, and as for the ship's doctor candidate Rhodes has chosen, he's just a kid. I'd have my doubts too, unless he really is some superhuman fruit user specializing in surgery." "Fruit of surgery," Luo repeated under his breath, but his expression stayed unreadable, his guard up. Lafitte leaned forward, amusement glinting in his eyes. "Don't be so wary. Judging by you, we're hardly equals in strength. Besides, you just took down that entire group. Your energy must be running low." At those words, Luo's face darkened noticeably. Nathan stood perfectly still, heart racing. He'd just tapped into his devil fruit's surgical power to hunt for Lafitte, but found nothing. Worse, he'd completely missed the man who'd followed him this entire way. Keeping his voice low and steady, he finally spoke. "What do you want?" Lafitte stepped out of the shadows, a lazy grin on his face. "You." Nathan's jaw tightened. Even with his Spectre pistol, the Wraith's cry model, in his hand, he felt the chill of Lafitte's silent presence behind him. He extracted the gun slowly, finger grazing the trigger guard, but dared not raise it. "Take it easy," Lafitte said, hands raised in mock surrender. "We're not the same kind of bounty hunters you ran into moments ago. That 100 million berry price on your head? We don't care about it." Nathan's grip on the pistol tightened. "Then why follow me?" Lafitte chuckled, stepping closer under the dim lantern light. "Honestly, we want to make a deal." Nathan's heart pounded. He didn't lower his weapon, but neither did he fire. "What kind of deal?" he demanded. Lafitte's grin flickered with amusement. "Let's talk." Nathan watched as Lafitte's smile vanished, replaced by a surprising seriousness. The tension in the alley eased slightly around him, and the shadowed corners seemed to lean closer, waiting. In a low, measured voice, Lafitte repeated the offer he'd clearly rehearsed. "We can kill Doflamingo for you," he said. "All you have to do is join us." Nathan's eyes went wide, his breath catching in his throat. He'd never told anyone, at least never out loud, that he wanted to see Doflamingo dead. Yet here they were, offering him exactly what he'd hoped for, as if they'd known all along. How? Why? The implications raced through his mind. They knew his past, his motivations, his secrets. Silence stretched on between them, broken only by the distant drip of water from a cracked gutter. Nathan's heart pounded as a dozen questions formed on his tongue, but he swallowed them all. Finally, his voice came out steady and cold. "You can kill Doflamingo? You're serious?" "Who is Brother Doflamingo?" The answer couldn't be clearer. He's the very heart of the Don Quixote family, one of the Shichibukai under the king, and he carried a 340 million berry bounty even before he officially joined their ranks. Ever since Corazon's death, Nathan has nursed a single burning thought: revenge against Doflamingo. He knows he's far too weak for a head-on challenge. The Don Quixote family looms over him like an unmovable mountain. If he's to avenge Corazon, it will take at least 10 years of preparation. When Luo finished speaking, Lafitte, who had stood unmoving beside him, broke into a mirthless smile. The mission was done. Without uttering a word, he gave a subtle flick of his wrist. From thin air, a yellowed slip of parchment fluttered toward Luo. It was a bounty notice, and the name printed on it was Nathan's. 200 million berries. No other proof was needed. Such a staggering reward meant Nathan had struck a blow that even the Don Quixote family couldn't ignore. Luo's eyes gleamed as he picked up the notice. Though he operated in the darkest corners of the North Blue, he was no stranger to the headlines of the Grand Line. Now, with Nathan's new bounty in hand, the underworld would know exactly whose arrival they had to fear and whose fall would make history. Nathan's pulse quickened as Lafitte inclined his head and spoke in that silky, patronizing tone. "Even if you've mastered a devil fruit, you still can't compare to a royal devil like the Prince's Kiwuhai. Yet our captain insists on you, even values you more. It's an offer you simply can't refuse, unless you'd rather smash your chips to bits. Heh." Before Nethan could answer, Lafitte seemed to melt into the shadows. In the next heartbeat, he reappeared at Nethan's right side, the tip of his crimson cane resting lightly on Nethan's shoulder. Nethan's hand, which had been gripping the hilt of his wraith blade, slid open. He wanted to resist, but there was no time, no space. Lafitte was already inside his guard. A sudden thought flashed through Nethan's mind. He did have the same chip in his pocket. These tradable chips came from the fruits of ageless surgery, a perfected devil fruit rumored to grant eternal youth and life. Now, with that chip firmly in his grasp, the balance of power had shifted. Chapter 100. Crisis is approaching. A pale dawnlight danced on the restless waves as Lafitte strode ahead, Trafalgaro following him in near silence. In minutes they reached the ghost shadow, its sleek black hull tied to the wooden pier. With a graceful leap, Lafitte landed on the ship's railing and cast a backward glance toward the shore. "Need a hand getting aboard?" he called down. Nethan shook his head once. In a fluid motion, he swept his hand through the air, and a faintly glowing, 10-meter-wide dome flickered into existence around him. Before Lafitte could blink, Nethan's figure vanished from the sands and reappeared atop the Ghost Shadow's deck, as if stepping through a doorway in space. Lafitte let out an impressed whistle. "Neat teleport trick, though I can't say it'll win you many duels." "Captain," Lafitte said, turning to Trafalgaro, "your man has arrived." Nethan stood calmly where Lafitte had just appeared, dressed in nothing more than a simple linen shirt and a lightweight cloak. Without hesitation, he met Trafalgaro's gaze and spoke in a low, even tone. "I want to join the Ghost Hand Pirates as your ship's doctor. In exchange, you'll take care of the Don Quixote family, for good." Lafitte and Trafalgaro exchanged looks as the morning breeze carried that promise across the deck. Nethan drew in a steady breath, his dark eyes unwavering. A single deal, he knew, could tip the balance of power, and the ocean itself held its breath in anticipation. Nethan stood on the deck, the sea breeze ruffling his dark hair. Only moments ago, he had slain a Chiwuhai creature, an opponent so powerful that even standing still afterward radiated an almost suffocating pressure. Luo Shensheng hesitated a heartbeat too long before he finally spoke. "Doflamingo isn't someone you can just take care of," Luo said, his voice low. "The Don Quixote family's influence stretches into the Navy and even the world government itself." Nethan offered a faint, confident smile. "I'm well aware. Bringing down Doflamingo will require careful, long-term planning. But trust me, whatever challenge he poses, it'll still be easier than dealing with what you've faced so far." Luo fell silent, skepticism warring with relief. After a moment, he asked, "When do we move?" "When we're back on the Grand Line," Nethan replied coolly. Luo realized he had no real choice. He'd stepped aboard Nethan's ship voluntarily, but unless he wanted to be marooned at sea, he'd have to go along with this plan, for now at least. Before Luo could voice his reluctant agreement, Nethan's pocket communicator buzzed with a gentle purr. He slipped his hand into his jacket and pulled out the small, sleek bug. "It's Nethan," he said. He pressed it to his ear, and a calm, dignified voice, Robin's voice, flowed through the earpiece. Nethan's hand tightened around the comlink. On the other end, Robin's voice crackled with urgency. "They've sent government agents after us. I'm doing my best to stay one step ahead, but I don't know how many there are. I'm on Albero Street, East District." He didn't flinch. "Understood. Keep your head down and don't take unnecessary risks." He glanced at Lafitte and Luo, who were leaning against the railing on the lower deck. "Lafitte, gear up. You're heading to the East District. Find Robin, get her out safely, and bring her back here immediately." Lafitte saluted and turned to disappear into the crew's quarters. Luo stared after him, brows knit in confusion. Nethan met Luo's gaze and spoke gently. "I'm sorry, Luo, but this is urgent. You can either wait here or disembark at the next safe port. Your choice. I don't want you caught in the middle of this." Luo hesitated, feeling the sting of being sidelined. Nethan offered a reassuring smile. "I'll explain everything once we're clear of immediate danger." Then he tucked the comlink away and headed for the helm, steeling himself for whatever lay ahead. "It's not a deal," Rhodes insisted, his voice rippling over the water. "I'll answer only to the crew members I personally approve, nothing more." His words hung in the air. Luo stood motionless, staring at the shoreline, but the ship was gone. Nathan and Lafitte had vanished as silently as they'd arrived. Lafayette had compelled Luo to make this journey, and he already had a plan of his own. He didn't fear death, but if he died here, Corazon would never know justice. Someone had to avenge him. Even if Rhodes demanded the harshest terms, Luo was prepared to swallow his pride and comply. Yet Rhodes's unexpected attitude left him unsettled. Remain with them, or slip away while he still could? Luo's mind churned. Several miles east, in the Eggstar Kingdom's outer slums, Albero Street buzzed with a rough sort of prosperity. Neon signs flickered above dive bars, and ragged shoppers jostled hardened street urchins for scraps of coin. Here, pirates and local gangs stalked the narrow lanes as predators hunt scavengers. In a dimly lit alley off Albero Street, Robin slipped the small phone bug into her pocket. Her breathing slowed. Then she reached out with the subtle power she'd honed for espionage. Instantly, she saw and heard everything on the street beyond the wall. Government intelligence operatives moved through the city very differently from the Navy's uniformed Marines. They wore no insignia, claimed no rank, masters of disguise who gathered secrets under assumed names. And Robin was among the best. It was like looking for a single speck of dust in a whirlwind of people, impossible to pick out our targets, and every second out in the open risked blowing my cover. Earlier, I'd barely traded 2 strikes with an enemy fighter, just enough to recognize his 6 powers technique, then vanished at the first opening. He'd already deduced I was in this district, so I refused to make any rash move. Better to lie low and wait for Nathan and Lafitte to find me. Minute 1. Minute 2. The longer I stayed hidden, the tighter the knot in my chest grew. Outside, the crowds flowed endlessly, yet not a single world government spy revealed themselves. My only edge was invisibility. Thanks to the flower fruit, I could unfurl my limbs through walls and around corners, watching the street without being seen. Still, after about 7 minutes, something shifted in the crowd that made my blood run cold, and I knew in an instant that everything was about to change. A young man with a peaked cap and a long, sharp nose appeared at the mouth of the alley. He paused, staring into the darkness, then called out in a low voice, "There you are, Devil's Offspring. Nico Robin." Silence fell. For a moment, Robin didn't answer. Then her calm, measured voice drifted back from the shadows. "How did you find me? I can hear you breathing. Rizlad, you fought Bruno and nearly crippled him. Your strength rivals your cunning." The man didn't flinch. From the alley's entrance, he replied evenly, "And who are you?" Robin stayed silent, gathering her wits. She needed more information, chiefly who the world government had sent after her. But her question went unanswered for the moment. Kaku simply stepped forward, arms crossed in front of him, revealing himself more fully in the dim light. Finally, he spoke, voice as composed as his stance. "Kaku, World Government Intelligence Agency, CP9. Robin gave no visible reaction. As Kaku closed the distance between them, she readied herself for whatever move he would make next. Robin took a deep breath and unleashed his signature move. 30-petal hook claw. In an instant, 30 thorned vines burst from the ground, twisting and coiling around Kaku's torso and neck, trying to wrench him off balance. But Kaku didn't even blink. He rooted himself in place, let the vines tighten, then closed his eyes and murmured, "Iron body." Muscles bulged across his frame, flesh hardening into near impenetrable steel. The vines strained against him, but couldn't budge him an inch. Kaku opened his eyes, calm and unshaken. "You nearly hurt Bruno with that stunt," he said quietly, voice echoing with restrained power. "But it won't work on me. My Tao strength is 3 times 4. Robin's tendrils quivered as Kaku flexed against them. Despite their frantic writhing, they remained locked fast, proof that sheer strength alone sometimes wins the day.